Grazie. Bene.
Well,
Allora
we can begin now.
iniziare.
I'll confirm with the technical team. I'm excited.
Sono emozionata. Allora,
Let's get started.
iniziamo. Allora,
Welcome
benvenuti qui
to the
al
Artemide
centro
Congress Center.
Artemide Congressi.
There are
Siete
over
in
900
più
of
di
you here,
900 persone,
a truly
una
overwhelming
marea
crowd.
umana. E se guarda,
I say
veramente, lo
this
dico
with
proprio
trembling
con
in my
tremore nella
voice.
voce. Se
Had the pre-sale
continuava la
continued,
prevendita,
we would have
eravamo
easily
almeno
reached
2000
2,000
persone.
attendees.
Quindi
It's
era
incredible.
qualcosa di incredibile,
Something truly
qualcosa di
explosive,
esplosivo,
an
un'escalation
escalation none of us could have
veramente
anticipated.
inaspettata per tutti. Grazie
Thank
di
you for
essere
being here.
Grazie. Ovviamente
Naturally,
l'emozione
I'm
c'è
emotional
perché
because we
siamo
are part of
parte,
something
no? Siamo
historic.
parte, partecipi e testimoni di un qualcosa di storico.
Something that has never
Mai
happened
avvenuto
before.
prima. E tutto questo
This has only been made
possibile,
possible
reso
thanks to
tangibile.
3 remarkable individuals right in front of me.
Grazie a due persone che ho qui
Please
davanti a
join
me.
me in giving a
Un
huge round of
grandissimo
applause to
applauso a Corrado Malanga, Armando May e Filippo Biondi. Prego. Allora,
while they
intanto
take their
si accomodano.
seats.
Dunque, un ringraziamento
I'd like to extend
anche
a special
particolare
thank you
per
to our
gli
guests.
ospiti che sono arrivati, a cui abbiamo
Although we
potuto
couldn't
tenere
accommodate
un posto,
everyone
però
due to
veramente
safety
non abbiamo potuto
regulations,
far di più
we're
perché per
grateful for
ragioni di
those who made
sicurezza
it.
non abbiamo potuto far entrare più gente. Comunque, un saluto ai tantissimi ospiti.
A warm
non so,
welcome to Spazio Tesla.
Alberto Negri, ciao. Grazie a voi di essere qui. Poi alla dottoressa Gatti e Montanari. Salve. Poi Roberto Romiti, ciao. Grazie. Michele Guandalini. Poi abbiamo Valentino e Valentina di Porto X, eccoli. Ciao. Lorenzo Maria Pacini. Vai. Lamberto Rimondini. Victor Nunzi. Vai. Allora,
I would also like to acknowledge those who made the revealing Egypt tour along the paths of Zep Tepi possible.
Egitto svelato sulle vie dello Zep Tepi.
Luigi Squariglia, please come forward alongside Armando Me. He has just returned from the tour. Hello, Francesca and Luigi. They have a booth outside as the tour continues in collaboration with the Kefren project.
Ovviamente in collaborazione col progetto Kefren.
Would you like to say a few words?
2 secondi.
Hello, everyone.
Ragazzi, siete stupendi.
You are amazing.
Allora, noi siamo
We'll be outside
fuori
with
per il
details on the next tour
per le
dates from
prossime
October
date,
12th to
ottobre
17th.
12-17, ok?
We can't wait to see many of you for this
mi raccomando,
fantastic
per questa
experience.
esperienza fantastica.
What else is there
Che
to
dire?
say?
You've said it all.
Siamo qua, entriamo in punta
We're
di
here,
piedi perché
stepping in
siamo
humbly as a
collaborati di
small
questo
part of
team.
this team.
E peraltro
In
in sala
fact,
ci
a
sono
few participants from the tour are in the
un piccolo
audience.
gruppo dei
Let's give them a round of
partecipanti. Siamo
applause.
tornati 10 giorni fa.
We look
Facciamo un
forward to
piccolo
seeing you
applauso
soon.
e vi
Have a
attendiamo
wonderful
numerosi.
conference.
Buona conferenza a tutti.
Grazie.
Thank you so
Grazie a
much.
voi. Allora,
Finally,
l'ultimo
a special
saluto,
thanks to the
ringraziamento
expedition
al
team.
Team Expedition che Allora, un ringraziamento
Rita
a
Monteleone
video
for video editing. Manuel Voltolinas
web manager.
for web management. Roy Bennet for the
la
expedition's
musica di
music,
Expedition. Ciao.
and myself,
Ed io,
Nicole
Ciccolo, la
Ciccolo,
voce
as the
di
voice of
Expedition.
Expedition.
Allora,
I'll
guardo il
signal the
tecnico
technician.
e dico, vai,
Let's start
diciamo,
with the
con la
opening
sigla
theme.
di apertura.
Go
Vai.
ahead. A team of researchers including Filippo Biondi, Armando and Corrado Malanga have combined their expertise to uncover what no one else has had the courage. Or capability to investigate until now. Through previous works, including books and a scientific article published in an international journal, Malanga, and Biondi revisited the history of the Giza Plateau. They not only correlated its monumental constructions with the ancient Egyptians' astronomical knowledge, but also applied cutting-edge aerospace technologies and a pioneering approach using phononic spectroscopy. By analyzing electromagnetic information through this novel spectroscopy, the researchers managed to explore the hidden structures within the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Their findings illuminated previously unknown internal features that Egyptologists had sought for years using non-invasive methods. The innovative application of Synthetic Aperture Radar, s.a.r., allowed the team to peer inside the otherwise impenetrable megalithic monuments of Giza. This ambitious endeavor aimed to place the major constructions of the Giza Plateau within a more accurate and comprehensive historical context of ancient Egypt.
Dunque,
At the beginning of this journey, I opened a book, perhaps by chance, though I doubt it, and came across a quote from Gilgamesh, which I would like to share with you now. Before passing the floor to our speakers, he who saw the deep, who understood the secret, who revealed what was hidden, brought back a story from before the flood. And now, The time has come.
ciò che non è
The moment is here to reveal what has never been told.
a voi. Grazie.
Thank you. Over to you.
Armando May.
Si sente? Ok. Innanzitutto grazie a tutti quanti voi, siete straordinari. Io devo dire, mi ricollego un po' a quello che diceva prima.
I was just saying this to Nicole, as far as I can remember.
Veramente non ricordo
In the last 30 years, I don't recall conferences on this topic or related subjects with such a large turnout. It was a surprise for us as well, a very pleasing one, because you give us support and the right energy to continue this extremely challenging work. So thank you and give yourselves a round of applause because you are extraordinary. You are the vanguard of a new TIP, of a new era, because from today a new page of history begins to be written, the true story of our distant past. Thanks to what I have always called a new enlightenment, thanks to the union of experimental archaeological research and advanced technology, we are creating a highly effective combination. With scientific data, we are now able to definitely reconstruct what happened in our remote past. The CAFRE project was born on a specific date, September 1st, 2022, when a dear friend, Pino Morelli, whom I mention with great affection, arranged for me and Professor Corrado Malanga to meet in Pescara, Italy. It was a wonderful 2 days event, especially because when you're with Corrado, there's always something to learn. During those days, we exchanged views and shared topics. Corrado and Filippo were working on their research on the Great Pyramid of Khufu, which in my opinion is groundbreaking, while I was pursuing a research project that began in 2021 on the northern shaft of the Queen's Chamber. At that time, I was sharing my work with Jean-Paul Boval, brother of Robert Boval, the author of the Orion correlation theory, whom I consider my mentor. It was an important experience because I'm like St. Thomas. When I see that the research project is extremely serious, I dive into the details to see if there are correlations with my own studies. While they were studying the Great Pyramid of Khufu, I was focusing on a specific part of it. This image refers to a section of the northern shaft of the Queen's Chamber, particularly the 7th block, where I noticed debris on the floor of the shaft and stone on the opposite side. From that, I was easy to deduce that someone had tried to force the shaft from the outside, and the stone had pushed against the opposite wall. This event reminded me of another shaft within the Great Pyramid, located at the entrance of the antechamber of the King's Chamber. It is known as the Caviglia conduit, as it was excavated by Caviglia, probably starting from a smaller hole. During the excavation, they reached the level of the northern shaft of the king's chamber. In this case, of the northern shaft of the Queen Chamber, the attempt to force the shaft is evident. What is particularly interesting is the upper part of the shaft, around the ninth block. It is clearly visible, indicated by the red arrows on the right side of the wall, a hole. Again, you can see the debris on the floor of the shaft. Among the debris, there is an entrance ticket to the Giza archaeological site, used between 1973 and 1991, as well as a plastic reel that was eventually identified as a piece of foil from Soviet camera from that same period. Clearly, someone managed to find the shaft leading to that point, to that unknown chamber, and not coincidentally, in my opinion, left traces of their presence. I wanted to investigate these details further to determine the height of that unknown chamber and verify if it had been detected by Corrado and Filippo's work during their reconstruction of the interior of the Great Pyramid. Interestingly, in their reconstruction, this chamber is marked in green. Well, that green chamber in their reconstruction perfectly matches the position of the unknown chamber inside the pyramid. It was absolute confirmation that the project they were working on and the technology they were using were accurate, and that, thanks to this technology, further advances in research could be made. This is how the CAFRE research project s.a.r. technology was born. A project that is first and foremost made of people who have created an extraordinary team, so in sync that it feels almost telepathic, a magnificent personal bond as developed. Personally, I grow every day because I'm in contact with two geniuses. For me, it's truly an extraordinary experience. You all know that in 2010, I presented my theory on the dating of Tepe at an international conference held at the Zayed University in Dubai. This research project went beyond the correlation theory proposed by Robert Bauval, which was my starting point. While Robert focused solely on the pyramids and the Sphinx, dating the site to 10,500 before Christ, I wanted to take it a step further because I had identified the limitations in both the technical analysis of alignments and the examination of all the elements on the Giza plateau that could be part of a larger global project. So I broadened the scope of my monument analysis to propose a more coherent dating based on what was observed on on the Giza Plateau.
della Sfinge, insomma tutta una
This
serie
led
di
me to
elementi
present
che
my
vanno
theory of the Septeti, dating it to 36,400 BC, considering not only the major pyramids and the Sphinx, but also the area where Kenkawa's mastaba is located, the NC2 tomb, the Sphinx Valley temples, and the temple of Amenhotep II. In short, a series of monuments that appear to be part of a global project, allowing me to align the Giza Plateau from east to west with the celestial vault. The result was a precise alignment. I therefore believe this dating could be the starting point for historically defining the Septeti.
ha veramente realizzato quell'impianto, capire come ragionare.
This study led me to a second question.
Da un punto di vista
If this complex is so ancient, who were the builders?
complessa, più ampia
Who constructed this site in such a remote time?
di questa civiltà.
At that point, it became necessary to choose an analytical model.
Ma il problema
The most effective approach to understanding the entire structure was to try to get into the minds of those who built the Giza monument,
noto a tutti che si
to understand their reasoning
E allora
and how they developed the project from an architectural, engineering, and scientific perspective.
perché attraverso il numero si comunica
Furthermore, I wanted to grasp what kinds of communication systems could connect the past to the present.
attraverso questo strumento non
This model is what I call the syntax of thought.
ulteriore elementi di valutazione
One possible system of communication is the classic one, phonetics, for example.
soltanto con la superficie.
However, the problem is that there are no inscriptions in the Giza pyramids. I don't consider the so-called vice graffiti found in one of the jet chambers, which is now widely recognized as a forgery. So, what could have been another system of communication?
Ad esempio nel tempio
The language of numbers, for example.
che si trovano sotto
Numbers are a tool of an universal language, capable to transcending space and time. Since a numerical value remains unchanged in the past, present, and future. Through numbers, codes are conveyed through the space-time. Another fundamental aspect is the study of astronomy. Not only did it allow me to date the site, but it also provided further insights, which, in light of the results of the CAFRE project, revealed connections not only with the surface, but also with the underworld of Giza, which gradually emerged step by step. Similarly, the study of geometry and mathematical constants played a crucial role, as did the language of archetypes, which became evident through the analysis of the monuments on the Giza Plateau. A prominent example of this approach is the Valley Temple, one of the two temples at the foot of the Sphinx. Understanding the mindset of those who designed the site was essential. On this journey, I also relied on the work of various authors, including George Hart, an archaeologist from the British Museum. His publications, particularly his study on the goat thought, were invaluable in helping me grasp the most intrinsic characteristics of this deity. In fact, thought is the mythological figure most closely associated with the construction of the entire Giza complex. I started from these fundamental elements to deepen my understanding of the connection between thought and the design of the Giza plateau. Numerous interesting clues have emerged, making it evident that there is a need to further investigate certain details directly on site. Within the Egypt Unveiled tour, I combined passion for archaeology and pleasure to explore new cultures. We went to Egypt to visit the Giza plateau and its main monuments, but also to closely examine specific details regarding the pyramid of Cheops and that of Khafre. I will not discuss the pyramid of Menkaure today. Perhaps we will do so on another occasion, but I anticipate that there are very interesting aspects to explore. Regarding the pyramid of Cheops, the first thing I want to analyze with you are these blocks located on the north facade of the pyramid, along the path leading to Al-Mamun's entrance. An entrance created forcefully from the inside and not from the outside, as commonly thought. Claiming otherwise is nonsense for several reasons. The first is that it would have been incredibly fortunate to drill exactly in correspondence of the ascending conduits. In reality, they entered from below, and we will see from where later. These sandstone blocks show clear traces of water erosion, honeycomb watering. This characteristic is visible only on some blocks in that section of the facade, as well as on some blocks located in the northwest corner, starting from the fifth course upwards. These are the 2 points I analyzed. This indicates that, evidently, at the time of the so-called universal flood, the pyramid had suffered damage, as some parts of the covering had already collapsed, exposing the blocks to water erosion. Furthermore, that area was submerged by the sea during the catastrophic event. These traces of honeycomb watering are therefore extremely significant. Let's now move on to the plateau in front of the east facade of the Great Pyramid. It is a limestone pavement composed of huge blocks, so large that they cannot be fully framed by a camera and seen clearly and sharply. They are perfectly squared and aligned with each other, even if they are very damaged.
piramide.
This plateau surrounds the entire pyramid, and
E poi veniamo
so
alla
you will
camera.
see, as you will see,
In questo punto
this detail
c'è
will
il
acquire
famoso,
further relevance when Professor
verso la
Malanga
camera
speaks.
sottostante che si trova proprio
This
sotto
characteristic
la
of the plateau
camera.
is also found in the other two
In
major
quell'occasione mi sono
pyramids
intrattenuto
and in the Sphinx
con
area,
i due
confirming
custodi che
a
sono
common element
all'interno
to
della
the
camera,
main
che
monuments
regolano il
of the
flusso di
Giza
accesso a
complex.
quell'ambiente. Ci sono
Another
anche
interesting
contenuti
detail
chiacchiera
pointed
bene,
out to me by
ma ho
Filippo
posto delle domande
concerns
molto
the
precise su un ambiente
entrance
che
to
si
the
trova
Great Gallery.
dopo un momento, come dire,
As soon
di
as you
loro
exit
imbarazzo,
the
ed erano anche un
ascending
po'
conduit,
restii, diciamo così,
if you look up,
a parlarne,
you will
piano,
notice
insomma,
a
sono venute
granite
fuori delle
block
cose che sono
that
estremamente
obstructs
interessanti.
a hole,
Tutti
probably a
quanti
conduit
probabilmente avrete visto
leading
già
to
queste
another
immagini.
internal
Si tratta di un
chamber of the
muro
pyramid.
che evidentemente non è di
This
periodo
block
egizio.
acts as a stopper
Ecco.
and is
È
located
stato
exactly
costruito
at
nel
the
corso degli
point
anni 80
indicated
questo
by
muro.
an arrow.
A una mia domanda precisa
This same
su qual era
point,
la necessità
indicated
di
in
eliminare
red,
questa
was
ostruzione,
identified by
mi hanno,
Corrado and
come dire, tra
Filippo
virgolette,
in their
rivelato che
reconstruction
questo
thanks
muro,
to the
oltre questo
s.a.r.
muro, c'è
technology.
un corridoio che scende giù per
Another detail of the Great Gallery was noted by Filippo Biondi, who invited me to pay attention to a specific point detected through satellite data.
in basso fino
It is another granite block apparently positioned to close a possible passage into the
È
pyramid.
molto probabile
This block
chi
is
ha
located
esplorato
on the second
quella camera che
section
abbiamo
of the
visto
Great
prima
Gallery
nel
along the
condotto,
east wall.
quando vi ho parlato del condotto nord della camera della regina,
Finally,
sia
let's
passato proprio
talk
da quel
about the
varco
King's
che
Chamber.
abbia preso la
In this
direzione
room,
verso l'alto e si è
there is
affacciato
an
nel
opening
quindi è da
that
lì che
leads
sono
to
passato.
an area below. During a visit,
E passiamo
I spoke
alla
with
piramide
two
di
custodians who control the flow of
Kefren è
tourists
stata molto
and asked them
in
specific
verità era la prima
questions
volta che
about this
accedevo
room.
a quella
Initially
convento.
reluctant, they gradually shared the relevant
degli
information.
interni rispetto almeno quelli
You
che
have
conosciamo.
probably seen images
Poi
online
faremo vedere
showing this
ha
room
uno sviluppo
under the
diverso
King's
rispetto a
Chamber
quello che è la
There is a wall
grande piramide. È
that
interessante
evidently
notare
was
che
not built
anche qui
by
alla
the
fine del
ancient
condotto
Egyptians,
discendente, quindi
but
dall'ingresso
dates
fino alla
back
fine
to
di questo
1980s.
una volta
When I asked
in
why
un
it
condotto
was
orizzontale, che è
necessary
anche
to
abbastanza
build
alto,
that
infatti io stavo
wall,
in piedi, a
the
differenza
custodians
del condotto
revealed
mi ha fatto
that
un po'
behind it there is a conduit that
intorno alle metri di
descends for several
C'è
meters.
questa nicchia.
At a
Quello che
certain
vedete qui all'interno
point,
della nicchia
the
è il
path
marchingegno dello
splits.
Scan Pyramid.
One conduit
Stanno
continues
rivelando
downwards,
le famose
ending in a
nella
well,
speranza di beccarne uno.
while the other
Vedete un po'
goes
l'ambiente
upwards.
interno.
It is very likely
loro
that
tecnologia.
whoever explored the
Carità,
chamber
rispettiamo
discovered
insomma,
previously
poi io
connected to the
sia,
north shaft
diciamo,
of the
poco
Queen's
efficace
chamber
per venire a capo
passed
dei
through
segreti che
one of
fornisce
these
quel
corridors
monumento.
just described.
Questa nicchia si trova in realtà qui nella ricostruzione che
Let's
vedete
move on to the Pyramid of
grafica.
Khafre.
In realtà non è proprio preciso.
The visit was very interesting, also because it was the first time I entered that monument, usually closed to the public.
Nota
The internal structures developed differently compared to that of the Pyramid of Cheops.
come dire, c'è stato negato l'accesso.
At the end of the first descending conduit, there is an horizontal conduit,
entrare, ma non
tall enough for me to stand, which has a particular niche.
Dello Scan Pyramid,
Inside the niche, a machine by scam pyramid technicians was placed, used to detect particles called muons, with the aim of identifying any voids inside the pyramid. While respecting this technology, I consider it ineffective for this purpose, as demonstrated by the results obtained so far. This niche is located near a descending corridor that leads to another room, the second and last currently known inside the monument. I would have liked to visit it, but it was not possible, probably due to the activities of scam pyramids. However, I hope they limit themselves to positioning the machinery without resorting to invasive techniques that could damage the monument, as unfortunately happened in the Queen's chambers of the Great Pyramid, where holes were drilled in the floor, compromising its original structure.
E questa invece è un'altra nicchia che si trova qualche metro più su. Questa nicchia è
Another interesting detail is found inside the second horizontal conduit that leads to the Balzoni chamber.
Lo ostruisce perché
It is accessed through a second ascending conduit
non è possibile estrarlo
along the east wall, proceeding towards the burial chamber. A particular block is visible, highlighted in red. It is curious that it is the only one with a completely different shape compared to the others in the corridor. It could represent a point of interest to verify the existence of any openings towards still unknown environments.
Molto carina.
In the same area, there is a niche located on the wall leading to the Balzoni chamber. Its shape is peculiar. The inner block is made of pink granite, while the outer one, which seems to be obstructed, is made of limestone. The granite block cannot be removed without first removing the limestone one. This detail arouses curiosity, especially considering the use of granite in a predominantly limestone context. It could conceal something interesting.
Mi sembra di aver capito che non è che sia estremamente semplice.
Balzoni explored the funerary chamber exactly 207 years ago, on March 2nd, 1818. We entered on March 2nd, 2025, a particular emotion to celebrate this historical anniversary. In the photos, you can see the two shafts that characterize the opposite long walls of the chamber. However, an intriguing detail is found in the upper corner of the entrance wall, on the left. A hole that apparently has no obvious function except to indicate a possible access point to another shaft. On the opposite wall, in the same position, signs of maintenance work are noted, suggesting that a further shaft may have been hidden. This would lead to the hypothesis of the existence of 4 shafts instead of 2. Unfortunately, s.a.r. is unable to detect them due to the small size of the blocks and the limestone plate that surrounds the pyramid, which absorbs satellite signals. Finally, in the burial chamber, You can observe the blocks that surrounds the sarcophagus. These surviving blocks of the removed flooring have very interesting details. In particular, homogeneous holes are noted, centered on each block. They are well defined in reach of depth of 7-8 centimeters. Professor Malanga hypothesizes that these holes may have been used as support points for tools necessary to position the cover of the top.
Hanno esplorato questo monumento.
Finally, a small detail of the niche located on the west wall, just after the end of the first descending conduit. It is a limestone block that probably served to close the access opening to the horizontal corridor.
Si utilizzava questa famosa.
The Great Pyramid of Khafre is rarely discussed, but it is a monument that has been studied in the past through the use of non-invasive technology. We know that the first to enter the pyramid was Belzoni in 1818, and subsequently it was explored by John Perrin, a friend of Howard Weiss. One of the first analyses using technology dates back to Luis Alvarez, Nobel Prize winner in physics, in 1968. In 1967, Alvarez studied the pyramid using the technology to detect muon particles, as Scan Pyramid is doing today. On that occasion, considering also the technology of the time, the results were negative. At the time, Alvarez was able to study only a small part of the entire volume of the monument. Other experiments have been carried out by s.a.r. and the University of Riga. Very interesting is this last study, published during an international engineering conference. The two researchers detected imperceptible fractures in some courses of the pyramid blocks towards the northeast, which according to their analysis suggest possible internal collapses and consequently the presence of voids inside the monument. Therefore, there could be unknown environments inside the pyramid of Khafre. Another very interesting monument, in my opinion, is the complex of the valley temples of the Sphinx. In particular, I analyzed some elements related to the valley temple. This temple has a double structural characteristics. The photo was taken from the southeast corner of the monument. Externally, it is characterized by huge sandstone blocks, which form the perimeter of the monument and show deep traces of erosion. Inside, however, there is a structure made of granite. The official version says that the granite was placed later, during a maintenance work of the monument in the period of Khafre, during the Olki. This temple is attributed to Khafre because an overturned statue of the pharaoh was found inside it. However, it is the only reason for this attribution, since there are no inscriptions on the walls of the temple, just like in the case of the major pyramids. Therefore, there is not a quantity of archaeological finds that proves with certainty the link between the temple and Khafre, but only a statue found in a small well inside the temple. It is interesting to note the size of the granite blocks and the perfect cut of the stones. The blocks are huge, and some even reach 50 tons. Furthermore, the positioning of the granite is extraordinary. As can be observed, the blocks fit perfectly, highlighting a truly extraordinary construction technique, and certainly not attributable to the dynastic Egyptians. The stone processing is also exceptional. For example, a block has an internal curve, demonstrating a remarkable skill of the artisans. It would be unlikely to attribute this technique to the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom, who at the time mainly used copper chisel and wooden hammers. An aspect that had always intrigued me is the design form of this temple. Observing it from above, it even resembles an electronic circuit. But beyond this suggestion, it is interesting to analyze the symbolism and the communication language used by the builders of the temple. Through the syntax of thoughts, we can try to understand the reasons behind this architectural form. For example, on the left, there is a fork-shaped structure composed of 3 teeth, which could represent the number 3. In the center, there is a colonnade formed by 16 columns, which by adding the digit gives a result of 7, 1 plus 6. Finally, a niche represents the number 1. In essence, observing these numbers, we are faced with the anagram of the number 137, a value that I had already detected in the past during the analysis of the dimensions of the Pyramid of Khafre. This data was stunning, and I wanted to move deeply into the topic. First of all, the fork recalls the letter Shin, symbol of the translating form, which represents man who reincarnates a new body for a new life. The number 1 recalls the letter Tau, whose meaning is the reincarnated and the completion of an extraordinary and divine work. The shape of the temple recalls the letter Zain, which evokes the concept of immortality. All these elements, put together and analyzed in the light of the information emerging from the analysis of s.a.r. technology, suggest the hypothesis that what is observed under Giza can be associated with the last city of Amenti, the city of the gods. This city, according to tradition, had a symbolic function of the kingdom of the afterlife, to be crossed for a new rebirth, as described in the Egyptian Book of Death, in the Book of Hidden Chamber of Amduat, or in the pyramid
l'unica
text.
formula che applicabile a questo
Of course, I asked myself why the number 371 had emerged and not, for example, the 137 that I had found in the study of the Pyramid of Khafre.
La vedete qui.
I could have applied several arithmetic operations to this number, but I wanted to use symbols linked to the Egyptian deities. One of these symbols is the Ankh key, the key of life, which corresponds to the arithmetical sign plus. By applying the sigma function to the number 371, the result obtained is 432. This number represents a fundamental frequency for the duplication of human DNA, a further reference to life and immortality. Therefore, the code 42, combined with 137, suggests a possible interpretation. Giza is the length of space-time and the place of immortality. Furthermore, these data offer insights into what might be found under the surface of Giza. The result of the research inevitably led me to deepen the Emerald tablets. This document is subject to a great dispute among scholars, since the original text has never been officially found and consequently its reliability is questioned. However, the stories told in the tablets are extremely interesting and, in my opinion, deserve an in-depth analysis. During our research, we focused exclusively on the descriptions of the city of Amenti, leaving out other aspects that we will analyze later, once the work of mapping the subsoil of Giza is complete. The point of particular interest is represented by tablet 15 of the Emerald tablets, which presents a text in an apparently unknown language. One evening, together with Filippo, we decided to examine it more closely. After a long work of analysis, we came to a truly interesting conclusion. The sentences examined in their phonetic form and compared with Sumerian and some Proto-Semitic languages have precise assonances. However, the text is transcribed incorrectly, which is why it was necessary to reconstruct it with correct syllabification to understand its meaning. According to the deity taught, these sentences should be repeated as a mantra to live sensory or ultra-dimensional experiences. Anyway, here is the correct translation of the text. The temple of thought as an instrument of the spirit. Second, the instrument of the spirit makes people free. Third, to cut or detach from matter to serve the divine. Fourth, praise the Son of God or the deity on which to build the works of the kingdom.
Lo strumento
Fifth,
spirito,
the primordial spiritual entity forges the divine spirit.
Lo strumento
This interpretation led me to identify a series of clues that seems to lead directly to the kingdom of the afterlife and the mysteries of the city of Amenti. But where does the word Amenti come from? In ancient Egypt, there was a deity worshipped during the Middle Kingdom with the name of Imentit or Amentit. The double final T indicates the feminine gender. This deity was also known as the goddess of the Western Hill, the place where the sun sets and where, symbolically, life ends to begin the journey into the afterlife. The word Amenti, divided in this way, means water or seat of the divine power of life. This interpretation is very significant as it connects to the archetype meaning of the number 137, 137, which represents the entrance to the divine house of life. Therefore, while the archetypes indicate the pyramid of Khafre as the entrance to the divine house of life, Amenti represents the place of the divine power of life. Furthermore, there are interesting descriptions relating to the city of Amenti. Particularly, I refer to those that speak of huge rooms as large as space, known as the chamber of death or the chamber of life. In the images that Professor Malanga will show you, you can observe two vast environments detected through s.a.r. technology located exactly under the pyramids. Another significant element described in the Emerald Tablets concerns the wells that characterize the Giza plateau. These wells are located both near the pyramids and at a certain distance, especially in the southeast and northwest areas. There are many of them, and most likely they do not date back to the dynastic period. According to the text of the Emerald Tablets, these wells were created to bring life and light to Amenti. It is surprising to note how numerous elements described in the tablets seem to match the data emerging from s.a.r. surveys. Another fundamental aspect to underline concerns the relationship between Amenti, Rospel, and Duat. Egyptian civilization is deeply based on the concept of duality. This principle is evident in religion and spirituality, represented through the figures of Ka and Ba, for example, as well as in the conception of time, divided between linear time, Nehech, and cyclical time, Jet. Even in everyday life, this duality is reflected in the elements such as the royal cubit and the Egyptian cubit.
con quello che stavamo
From the data currently available, we can have a clear understanding of this
sembra
division.
veramente molto
Amenti
rilevare.
represents the physical afterlife located below the surface of Giza.
Si fa riferimento
The term Rostau,
e si fa riferimento
in my opinion, refers to the surface of the Giza
per il
plain,
concetto di dualità. Troviamo
where the monuments were built.
nella parte spirituale,
Duat, finally, represents the celestial dimension of the afterlife. This fully reflects the principle of as above, so below, a foundation of the philosophy attributed to the deity Tot. But what is the relationship between Giza, ZTP, and Amenti?
Che fa riferimento
The answer is simple.
sono le piramidi, Sfinge,
To fully understand the Giza Plateau, it is necessary to study it as a wall, from east to west, without limiting oneself to the pyramids alone, the Sphinx or other individual monuments. It is necessary to analyze it as a global context, considering also the connection between the various architectural and symbolic elements, extending the analysis both horizontally and vertically, from bottom to top.
Soltanto se la studiamo nella sua
To the east we find the Sphinx, with its function as guardian of life, which welcomes the rising of the symbolic sun, marking the beginning of a new existence. Life then develops during the day. The sun follows the path along the ecliptic. To the west is Amentet, the goddess of the western hill, symbol of death and the end of the earthly life, which marks the entrance to the afterlife. Below the surface extends Amenti, the city of the passage of the soul towards a new rebirth in the east. Thus, in a tangible way, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth manifests itself, a central principle in the spiritual and religious structure of ancient Egypt. Thank you for listening.
Tutti per l'attenzione. Grazie. Sì.
Armando, thank you. Thank you.
Grazie.
Sinceramente,
Honestly, I am a bit emotional because it's the first time that
grazie.
thank you. Thanks for the applause.
Grazie per
But I think now the emotion has increased.
adesso. Toccherà
I
di
might have to say a bazinga now.
Così si...
So, like this.
E quindi
So this is the first time I'm presenting in front of so many people. And I really appreciate it because our motivation is all of us
la
together.
nostra motivazione
I truly thank you all
tutti
coming here in such large number to listen. In this presentation, I'll have to deal with some formulas, so it's time to bring in a bit of mathematics. Why? Because it's best to explain things exactly as they are. We need to properly understand the technique we used to carry out the scans. The underground scans that Professor Malanga will present to us. The little space sonar. Sonar is a remote sensing device. Remote sensing is a scientific discipline conducted from space, used precisely to measure things at a distance. Remote sensing, so measuring from a distance. Now someone might ask, all right, but what does sonar actually do? It transmits acoustic waves and receives the echoes from those waves from the object it wants to detect. In fact, it is used on ships, but it's also used on land and even on ice to understand the structure of the ground below. But from space, how does it work? Well, from space it doesn't work. In fact, space sonar is a little provocative, because in space, since there's no medium to propagate acoustic wave, it's impossible for it to work. I wouldn't say impossible, because in the end we actually used a space sonar, and that's exactly why we're here to understand how it works together. So the agenda is quite packed, and I'll try to be quick. Consider that the first 2 points I'll explain a bit about the state of the art in satellite remote sensing. Then we'll move to a technique we came up with to try and understand how this works and how we manage to obtain underground scans. After that, I'll present some case studies, starting with a brief mention of the Pyramid of Chaos, or Khnum Khufu, and then moving on to other things. For example, some experiments we conducted at the Gran Sasso d'Italia, on the Mosul Dam, or the Gotthard Base Tunnel in Switzerland, and then I'll hand things over to the professor. So we use what are called synthetic aperture radars, and I'm going to explain to everyone what the word itself means, aperture, and what synthetic aperture actually is, because things need to be properly understood. First of all, synthetic aperture radars are mostly, actually not mostly only, mounted on satellite in space, and they are placed only in low Earth orbits. Low Earth orbits consist of circular paths in space and distances from the Earth's surface ranging between about 400 and 700 kilometers, so they are relatively close to us. Just to clarify, there are 2 other fundamental orbits.
Prevalentemente viene piazzate prima e dopo le fasce di Van Allen.
The low Earth orbit consists of circular paths in space and distances from Earth's surface, ranging between about 400 and 700 kilometers are relatively close to us. Just to clarify, there are 2 other fundamental orbits. The medium Earth orbit, which is typically positioned before and after the Van Allen belts, roughly between 14,000 kilometers and 18,000 kilometers. Why? Because it's not practical to keep satellite inside the banal and belts.
E ce ne sono tanti.
They would deteriorate faster, so they must be placed either before or either then. Otherwise, things just don't work.
Che è quella dei 36.000
And what kind of satellites are there? They include GPS,
solitamente
Global Positioning Systems, satellites, Galileo, the European Satellite Positioning System that we all use, for example, in our navigation devices. Then there's GLONASS and many other, basically every major geopolitical blocks builds its own satellite positioning system.
difficile farlo rimanere fermo.
Then finally we have the highest orbit at 36,000 kilometers,
Un organismo internazionale
well
che si chiama
behind the banal
il
belts.
cosiddetto ITU, che assegna ai paesi
In the orbit, satellites
la scatola dove deve essere piazzato il satellite per
revolution around the Earth perfectly matches the Earth's rotation. So, to an observer on the ground, the satellite appears to remain fixed
perché ultimamente l'orbita bassa è, dal mio punto di vista, l'orbita
in the
più
space.
massivamente impiegata, perché ultimamente
But it's not actually fixed because it's always moving. In fact, as we'll see later, it also traces patterns that look like figure
diciamo che l'orbita
eights,
bassa è molto
so keeping a geostationary satellite perfectly still actually quite difficult.
una
And then there's an international organization called the International Telecommunication Union, or ITU,
radar ad apertura
which assigns each country a specific slot in space where their telecommunication satellites must be
che
placed.
serve per fare la
So we have telecommunication satellite positioning and finally the closest orbit uses for remote sensing. But actually it's not that simple.
negli anni, quindi noi parliamo
Latterly,
di questo
in my opinion, low Earth orbit has become the most heavily used orbit, because recently even telecommunication satellites have been placed there, especially for low orbit internet service.
sicuramente ai naviganti e con questo
So let's say that low Earth orbit is extremely important
a bordo dei radar
because of its proximity to Earth.
con la nebbia
To Earth. All right.
brutto tempo.
Now let's take a look at why it's called Synthetic Aperture Radar.
Il problema
First of all, let's clarify. Radar stands for radio detection ranging. It's a device used to detect objects
segnale radar
that are far away
con la
and
quarta potenza della
at the
distanza.
same
E questo è il
time
problema.
measure their
Se
distance.
io trasmetto per esempio,
Over the years,
quello che ricevo
well,
è 0,000.
actually, people started thinking about this technology
Quindi c'è voluto
in the early 90s.
qualche
Scientists
signore
wondered, can we use electromagnetic waves to determine if something is in front of us?
che avevano la funzione specifica.
For example, it was definitely useful for sailors.
E poi
After the sinking of the Titanic, it became essential for ships to have radars on board. Why? Because when navigating in fog or bad weather, having the radar tuned on crucial to understand what's in front of you. The problem is that it took a long time, many years, to develop, because in this case, let's call it the received power of the radar signal. It decreases with the fourth power of the distance. And that's a big issue, because it means that if I transmit, let's say 10 in power, what I receive back in a long distance is only, let's say, 0.001 in terms of received power. And that's a problem.
Una definizione scientifica della risoluzione.
So I took a long time.
Spaziale è una distanza ed è una minima.
Someone had to come up with special vacuum tubes called traveling wave tubes, TVTs, or magnetrons, whose specific functions was to generate coherent radio frequency energy. And not only that, this energy also had to be high power.
Troveremo nel radar ad apertura sintetica. A un certo punto li osserviamo
moving forward.
Con una telecamera.
Over the years, scientists started thinking about mounting, or at least trying to mount, radars on satellites. For what purpose? To generate electromagnetic images. So we found ourselves facing a fundamental concept, a concept from classical physics that had already been encountered years before, for example, with telescopes. To visualize objects or targets that are far away, we need to work on a key parameter, and this parameter is the spatial resolution. Now, let me give you a scientific definition of the spatial resolution. Spatial resolution is a distance, and it's the minimum distance at which two objects can still be distinguished separately. In other words, if I have two objects, these two objects, and I move them farther apart, we need to keep in mind this concept of distance, because we will come across it again in synthetic aperture radar. At a certain point, if we observe them with anything, whether it's a camera, a photograph, or any device, there will be a moment when these two targets can no longer be recognized separately because the distance is too far, is too long. So, placing a radar, let's say, at 600 kilometers of altitude, we had to be very careful about resolution. Now, physics tells us that spatial resolution, let's call it, let's say, delta, which is measured in meters, is equal to,
provate per esempio a fare una fotografia.
Excuse me, yes, delta is equal to lambda times r over 2 times the aperture. Lambda is the wavelength of the physical parameter of the physical phenomena that we use for remote sensing. I can use anything, electromagnetic waves, so the entire category of light, up to gamma rays, electromagnetic waves, acoustic waves, and even matter. Matter also has a wavelength, as de Broglie told us during the times of quantum mechanics. Or, for example, I can use electrons, like when we need to use an electron microscope. The electron microscope, as the name suggests, uses electrons, so divided by 2, and you see that lambda and r are on the numerator, are up. This means that the more I increase r, the larger delta becomes, the lower the resolution will be. However, I need delta to be small because it represents a minimum distance required to be distinguished two objects separately, divided by 2 times the aperture. So, obviously, everything
ad esempio una risoluzione spaziale pari
everything is connected, strictly connected on the aperture. If I have to, if I have a camera and want to see details clearly, I need a camera with a large aperture, because I need a wide view of the object. A large aperture. For example, try taking a photo with a camera without a lens. It can be done, but what I get is not a proper photo. I get something. I get energy, yes, but I get something, yes, but it's not the photo. Absolutely. I absolutely must use a lens because the lens allows me to see things the way we're used to be seen in our life. That is, yes, after a Fourier transform process. So we can see things clearly after the Fourier transform process. What is the Fourier transform? The Fourier transform is that mathematical operator that, Professor, forgive me the term, transforms everything, that is, the wave into a particle. This is because we are used to seeing things compressed. We see this span because our eyes have performed a Fourier transform operation. Our eyes are constantly performing a Fourier transform process, instant by instant. So, to mount a radar in space, it was necessary to design a system with a large aperture. If you do the math, this aperture, using the inverse formula, for example, imposing a spatial resolution of, let's say, 1 meter, you'll see that the aperture required in space must be very large, kilometric, a huge antenna of 20 or 30 kilometers long. This means we would have had to install an antenna in space that's 20 or 30 kilometers long, an impossible task. It's not feasible to mount 20 kilometers long piece of iron in the space vehicle and then position it in orbit. Well, at a certain point in the 1950s, this project was set aside due to its because it was not practical. Impossible to be realized. It's just not possible. So, what we can do? Here's how it happened. There was a person, a gentleman named Carl Willey, who worked by Goodyear in United States, whom I call him as an heretic. There's always a clash between orthodox thinking and heretic thinking. If you look back in time and analyze what has appeared through history, we all discover that heretical thinking always wins. So heretic stands for aero, air, and air in Latin, aero in Latin, means freedom, and also thinking.
Quindi sono molto, dal punto di vista scientifico, sono molto accattivanti.
So what did Carl say? We said it made no sense to install a 30-kilometer long antenna in space. It was stupid unless, he said, cut a piece of this antenna, for example, a few meters long, cut it with a saw. Literally, take a saw and cut it. Do it. Then take this piece of iron, this fragment of metal, pick it up, put it on a launch vehicle, and shoot it into the space. Then the orbit will take care of synthesizing the antenna even up
tutti quanti
to
noi
8
possiamo capire
kilometers.
come funziona.
We'll see
Praticamente il satellite
what
che
we
cosa
have
fa?
a lot
Nel
of
momento in cui
aperture.
effettua la
We've
scansione,
used this,
chiamiamolo
and
nella
here
direzione
I'd like to
dell'orbita.
take the
Questa
opportunity
direzione
to
dell'orbita la
thank
chiamiamo
the,
azimut.
the two
Che cosa
American
fa?
providers
Trasmette degli impulsi
who
elettromagnetici
gave
a
us,
terra
and
e
not
ne
just
riceve
to
gli
us,
impulsi.
but
Ricevendo
to
questi
the
impulsi,
entire scientific
vengono
community. They gave us
messi
s.a.r.
sulla
data.
memoria di bordo.
They gave s.a.r.
Poi
data
il
to
satellite
everyone.
raggiunge, per esempio,
Free
dei
access to
satelliti,
satellite data
butta
with
il
an
terra, e da quella
aperture
parte
of 80 kilometers.
vengono distribuiti.
An aperture of 80 kilometers means a ground spatial resolution of about 5 or 7 centimeters, which is really very good for an excellent
una
resolution.
immagine.
So you see, the orbit takes care of it.
Per esempio,
In this case, the aircraft, but it doesn't matter. One can imagine a satellite flying in space, and here
guardate,
I'll tell you that remote sensing satellites usually travel in a circular
le
orbit
onde che trasmettono
from the South Pole to the North
vengono
Pole,
compresse da una parte ed espanse
South Pole
dall'altra.
to North
Allora, questo
Pole,
effetto si chiama
and then the
temporal.
Earth rotate
È solo per capire tutti quanti che
inside the circular orbit.
la parte
The ecliptic remains constant due to geodetic
sintetizzata
physics.
con i suoni.
South Pole to North Pole, and so the
Perché
Earth
casualmente la
rotates
banda
inside
Doppler
the circular
ricade
orbit.
esattamente
Satellites
nella banda
are
acustica
capable of
allora
taking
con il
photographs
Malanga acustica.
of any point of the Earth
Ci siamo
at least once a day.
abbiamo concentrato
So from a scientific point of view, they are very attractive.
in questa parola
Having everyone,
perché acustica?
the
A
problem
noi ci interessava
of
capire
aperture,
sotto le piramidi.
in this case,
E
we
dobbiamo
perform time
comprendere
division
questi momenti
scans
che
and
l'interazione elettromagnetica
at the
con la
same time,
materia
an aperture as long as we want, even
non
80,
si
80 or
possono
100
fare
kilometers,
così.
is virtually synthesized.
Io posso
This is
essere in
possible.
grado di trasmettere un gigawatt
It doesn't
di
matter
energia
because
fotonica,
what we
magari
care
ottenere 20 o 30
about is having a highest resolution on the ground.
nella materia.
Okay,
A chi te li dà 10
so
kilowatt? Sì.
what does the satellite
Abbiamo
do?
pensato di
I'll try not to go in too long, not to go it too long, because I imagine it might get heavy, but I'll try to explain it simply, so that all of us can understand how it works.
molto bene.
Essentially, what does the satellite do?
Più questa materia è
When it
densa,
performs the
la
scan,
velocità di propagazione
let's
del
call
suono è
it
elevata.
in the direction of the orbit, and we'll call the direction, this direction we will call it azimut.
È importante.
What does it do? It transmits electromagnetic pulses to the ground and receives their echoes.
Trasmette dei
Their echoes are digitalized, stored in the onboard memory, and then when the satellite reaches the downlink point, it sends the data to the ground, where it is distributed to people.
effetto Doppler.
Usually this data is indirectly usable, but needs to be processed to obtain an image. For example, look at this little machine here.
In prossimità, in avvicinamento,
As the satellite moves along the orbit, the waves
zero Doppler. Quindi
it transmits are compressed on the side and expanded on the other side.
ci passa al nostro trasverso, ascoltiamo la sua frequenza sonora.
This effect is called the Doppler effect.
La frequenza si abbassa.
To help everyone understand, the azimuthal part of the s.a.r. image is synthesized using sound. This is because the Doppler band falls precisely within the acoustic band. So, with Professor Malanga, we focused our efforts on the word acoustic.
Questo è il disegno di
Why acoustic? Because we were interested in looking beneath the pyramids. We must all understand that electromagnetic interaction with matter is only superficial.
Quello che noi
You can't
riteniamo, vedete,
perform miracles.
radar. Vedete?
Yes, I
Questi
might.
sono i dati che noi
I might be
riceviamo.
able to transmit a gigawatt of power in the form of photons energy and maybe achieve 20 or 30 meters of forced electromagnetic penetration into matter. But who's going to give you 10 gigawatts of power? It's impossible. So we throw off exploiting acoustic energy, the phenomenon, the phonon, because sound, the physical manifestation of sound, which is nothing other than the vibration of matter,
di questi goccioloni che stanno qua.
propagates, so this sound propagates very well through matter, and the denser the matter, the higher the speed of sound,
Presso la prima parte
and
dell'immagine,
better
poi
the results will be.
segnali di riferimento.
So granite is a perfect medium for sound,
che noi abbiamo
and
ricevuto,
this is important.
i tre
This is Synthetic Aperture Radar,
passati da una
which transmits chirp signals, which is a special signal characterized to be linearly frequency modulated. Chirps like this to resolve the range dimension while in azimuth. Yes, listen, this is the chirp.
Questo è un parametro importante.
We have the Doppler effect, so it appears to all of us while driving a car approaches us and hangs its horn.
Come dei puntini.
When the car is approaching the horn, relatively to its Doppler centroid, the frequency for which the horn was designed has a higher frequency. Then, as it passes us,
questo ci fa capire un altro.
we hear its original sound frequency, and as it moves away, the frequency is lowers the frequency. This physical phenomenon helps us to resolve the other dimension of the image, the azimuth dimension.
Allora, noi
Okay,
esseri umani che
so far it's been important for me to try to explain this in a simple terms.
visualizzare il
Look at this diagram here. It's a satellite radar. This is the design of TerraSAR-X, a German radar. Very good.
Ciò significa che
It flies along the orbit. Along the orbit. And let's assume it needs to take a picture of these three houses that are located here. What we receive are these echoes. These are radar echoes. There are the data we receive, and it's just this. We won't immediately see the image of the whole houses. The data must be processed, because this image you see is like that photo I mentioned earlier, taken without a lens, because there will still need to perform the Fourier transform. And how do we perform the Fourier transform? Like this. We take a transmitted electromagnetic signal as a reference, the so-called chirp signal, and we perform the convolution integral with the part we'll call the distance, the range, and these drops you see here. So, how we're doing the so-called range compression, trying to resolve the first dimension of the image? See, yes. We've compressed the first part of the image. Then, by taking a second set of reference signals, the Doppler frequencies we've received, we obtain these objects. So we've gone from a wave situation after a Fourier transform process to a particle situation. The particles are well defined and localized in the space-time, also on the s.a.r. image, because their localization on the s.a.r. image is always performed at the zero Doppler, at its Doppler centroid. This is an important parameter.
Then the wave from one slit can interact with the waves from the
Look,
other
this is another example of focusing.
Due sorgenti.
You see the objects visualized as drops
Vedete?
through their particles. They visualized through a particular function, the sync function, which is sin x over x. This helps us to understand another very important concept that Professor Malanga has stressed for years. The principle, the precise, difference between the territory and the map of the territory. We, humans, will always find it impossible to visualize the territory. But what we see with our instruments is our case. The radar is always a map of the territory. This means our map of the territory is that sin x over x function. This is a sync. We'll never see a dot, but we will see always a sync. It means we'll always see a function that approximates the dot.
Nel momento in cui io uso due radar, per esempio,
we can move on this. This is a part of focusing done in both range and azimuth to finally arrive, ladies and gentlemen, to our two-dimensional sync function, where we have the resolution values for both range and azimuth directions. We finally obtained the s.a.r. satellite image.
Usando dei radar ad apertura sintetica.
Now I'll show you some applications of synthetic aperture radars which belong to the state of the art.
Questo, ad esempio,
What the use of s.a.r. coherent is for. We use it massively, for example, for land monitoring. It's always important because s.a.r. has very high precision. Sub-millimeter precision. This means that if I position the radar in space and look the object on the ground, if that object moves even slightly, the s.a.r. will notice this movement. The radar can directly can detect sub-millimetric movements of objects on the ground. Let me show you this simple video that illustrates the principle of interferometric simulating two coherent electromagnetic sources. In this case, the interferometric s.a.r. is done combining data observed by two or more satellites. This is the video.
Allora, con il professore ci siamo accorti che qualsiasi fotografia, sia fotografie fatte con macchine fotografiche,
so in space we get areas where the electromagnetic power density is zero, destructive interference, and areas where it's doubled, constructive interference. What is this for?
Come ho detto prima, siccome ha
This allows us to estimate when using two radars, for example, the so-called interferometric fringes of the Earth. These fringes help us to estimate Earth's topographics. In 1980s, during a space mission by the shuttle, the topography of the entire Earth was mapped for the first time using s.a.r. An interferometer mounted on the shuttle. What is this for? For example, this technique would help us to estimate the location of Earth's fractures, study earthquakes, and monitor the Earth's movement.
risoluzione a terra.
Now, let's describe more precisely what we did for a project explaining how to transform photons energy into phonon energy. This is important. So with the professor Malanga, we realized that any photograph, whether taken with a regular camera or a synthetic aperture radar is never perfectly sharp. The image always comes out slightly blurred. Why? Because everything moves. With a camera, you might not see, but with radar, you can. As I said earlier, since the radar has such high precision, it could detect sub-millimeter movement of the Earth. So, what did we do? We invented a new method, the so-called Doppler sub-aperture method, where we didn't use the entire orbital synthesis to generate a satellite image at the maximum spatial resolution, which we didn't need. Instead, we successfully experimented with sacrificing some spatial resolution. For example, halving it. We choose only half of the entire Doppler band, the entire available Doppler band, to looking at things with less detail. It doesn't matter. We synthesized image using, for example, half the Doppler band, half the orbit, and then performed the time scan within the orbit. This helped us to demonstrate that it's possible to transform an electromagnetic wave into an acoustic wave. This is because during the intra-orbital scan, by applying tracking algorithms, we noticed that these pixels moved coherently with the Earth's movement. Everything was moving. The estimation of these movements applied to the pyramids, where we already knew these structures were set in motion by wind, human activity in Cairo, and a very important quantum phenomenon, the phonon-photon interaction with the matter, allowed us to see deeper. The synthetic aperture radar transmits electromagnetic pulses to the ground. Some of these pulses return to the receiver, while another are transformed into phonons. Very valuable phonons, because we noticed they maintained the same coherence as the transmitted signal, photonic signal. These phonons were able to penetrate the subsurface very well and deeply, reflecting off various layers and targets underground located. This information was then picked up by the radar in form of evanescent waves on the Earth's surface. We consider this feasible, absolutely feasible. So, by detecting these Doppler anomalies, we understood as evanescent waves visible on Earth's surface, we could map the subsurface. What did we do? In this case, I like to say we designed a space record player, where the vinyl is the Earth, the needle is the electromagnetic wave, so the lights, and the photon-phonon interaction of the record players is the stylus. So the stylus is the interface, what transduces the phononic information into electrical impulses and vice versa, in case we are considering the record player. A transducer is something that transforms information manifested in one physical form, into information manifested in a different physical form, in another physical form. And then the appetite comes within eating. Let's understand the scale of these vibrations. We estimated on high voltage cables, which we detected from a radar. If you've either noticed when you pass under high voltage cables, you near the ripple they vibrate due to the high voltage. We picked up this vibration noise from the radar from space. After these experiments, we said, Corrado, here we need to develop a software to perform the so-called tomographic inversion. We said this. Tomos means slice. We've managed to estimate the vanished vibration of Earth's surface. Why not estimate the subsurface consistency as well? So we designed a vibrating model consisting of springs attached to masses. These vibrating springs generate sufficient statistics to apply the Fourier transform, and so creating the lens, a special lens that allowed us to see underground. Now, I'll show you some things we did with Corrado, but only to retrieve the point. And here I think this very kind gentleman, who I respect, has greatly and did us a huge favor. Months after we had already published our peer-review article, the presence of the so-called corridor of the Discord in the Scam Pyramid project, he validated our theory. I thank him because he helped to validate our technique. Also, if he didn't cite us to his article, but never mind, it is I apologize if I've been a bit tedious with what I've said, maybe even with the formulas, but it was very important for all of us to understand well and how I am in this case, I am happier. I'll just show you a couple of examples where we applied the phononic version of the synthetic aperture radar to observe large infrastructures in our national territory, Italy, such as the Gran Sasso d'Italia laboratory. The Gran Sasso laboratory is a physical laboratory located at about 1.4 kilometers deep, measured from the peak of the Gran Sasso. Look at this photograph. We can comfortably call it a tomography. One of the first tomography we estimated. I always like to look at it because, from my point of view, it's beautiful, and I'd say it's almost. I can say this, bazinga. It's a moment that we can joke together. We managed to see the INFM, the National Institute of Nuclear Physics, represented by the laboratory of the physics laboratory and some section of the tunnel, the highway that passes inside the Gran Sasso. This is a zoomed in view where you can also see the interferometer at the end that tip you. See at the end in the interferometer, and here it always comes back, the interferometer. We are coherent living beings. We live within domain of coherence. Our mantra is the coherence resonance, but physicists have it too. Rightly so, because an interferometer cannot work in an incoherent situation. So we always use lasers that generate coherent light, low entropy light in terms of information, making them interfere, creating constructive and destructive interference patterns. Okay, I hurry up a bit so I can hand over to the professor. Let me just show you one more case of study. This is the Mosul Dam, a huge dam. We wanted to know if it was possible to look inside the dam. Inside the dam, there's a large gallery and a very important Italian company called the Trevi. A company, another company, an Italian bride, was commissioned by the Iraqi government to stabilize the structure. So Trevi was called by the Italian government to stabilize the Mosul Dam. The dam's consolidation is done through concrete injection. Inside the dams, there's a service gallery. Here I show you the tomography of the Mosul Dam, where the darkest section is the tomographic slice, and the blue in blue. You see the gallery. But we noticed that besides the gallery, we could also see other things, and I like to show you how they managed to visualize the turbine area. We were able to perform tomography in the machine room housing the turbines. In fact, the Mosul Dam, besides creating the reservoir of agricultural water storage, also uses part of the water to generate electricity, hydroelectric electricity. So, we imaged the turbines just to show you that it's possible to visualize the technical areas inside the dam. The last case of study I'll show you is the tomography of the Gotthard tunnel, where you can see the railway. Just to emphasize, this work has been submitted as an international PCT patent, currently active in Malta. I'm done, and all now hand over the professor. Thank you very much.
Eccoci qua. Allora, ci siamo.
All right, here we are. So yes, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Yes, the tip of the iceberg, because essentially we realized that we were only analyzing a small portion of a much larger mystery. Our idea was to investigate the pyramid of Khafre, also known as Khafre, and this idea originated from Armando May. When we first discussed it, our intention plan was to explore what was beneath the Sphinx. But Armando said, yes, sure, under the Sphinx, we know there are chambers and things that aren't openly speaked about, But there are data points suggesting that something is inside. However, would it be even more interesting to look beneath the Pyramid of Khafre? Because if there's something underneath the Sphinx, there must be something under the pyramid too. The myth, legend, and history suggest that this pyramid is connected to a series of elements, as Armando mentioned earlier, particularly tied to the god Thoth. So we thought, alright, let's give it a try. We're there, we have the radar, the radars. Let's see what happens. When I mark that Khnum Khufu, it means the one who was protected by Khnum. Then some mistakenly think that the pharaoh was placed there, inside the coffin. Below we see the Great Gallery, which is the large, dark, sloping passage. Beneath it, there's a small chamber, commonly referred to as the Queen Chamber. However, after continuing a few books, we discovered that it was nothing to do with the Queen. At the very bottom is the so-called unfinished chamber. We always wondered if they spent 4,000 years building this. Why didn't they finish that chamber? Maybe they just lost interest, who knows? On the left, you can see a couple of photos of a 3D model we presented in the remote sensing article, showcasing details no one had ever seen before. At the top, there are structures resembling giant forks, descending beneath the ground zero. Meaning underground, we will revisit this point later today from a different perspective. There are also structures extending upwards inside the pyramid, connected by a gallery that I usually highlight in red or light brown. You know, I don't see colors well. From another perspective, we can observe at least 12 underground chambers, which we've humorously called the cellars. Clearly, the pharaoh wanted to avoid paying property taxes, so he hid them underground and never declared them. These structures can also be found on the second book I co-wrote with Filippo, where we detail the technology involved, which Filippo has already described to you. Current analysis of Khafre's pyramid. Here we see a 3D model of what is known. The left image is a top-down view, the center one is a lateral view, and the right is an enlarged section of the latter. The pyramid appears completely empty. There's absolutely nothing inside. Beneath ground zero, we observe 2 narrow rooms and a couple of corridors with unusual shapes that had already caught our attention during a previous conference. We had discussed how, in the case of Khnum Khufu's pyramid, the structure functioned like a resonating instrument, using water, stone, and their vibrations to heal the pharaoh when he reached the final moments of his life, prolonging his existence in some way.
Allora, questa è una fotografia come l'occhio del satellite vedrebbe.
The first tomographies. We make a picture, a sound picture of the pyramids.
Con gli occhi nostri, se fossimo sul satellite. Perché
This image shows how a satellite would perceive the pyramid.
che noi vedremo. E poi è
You'll notice that the photograph doesn't look as we would expect.
in realtà un quadrato.
There are strange light spots, and the pyramid appears more like a rectangle
Piramide in questo modo.
than a square.
Finta che
This is due to the positioning of the satellite's antenna, which is tilted on multiple axes, causing distortions in the signals used to generate the image. The same issue affects the tomography scans we conducted, meaning we must take into account for this distortion in our analysis.
viene riportato indietro gli
Imagine that
questo tipo di
the satellite antenna, for simplicity, is a rectangle.
antenna ha una posizione
This is the antenna.
che in qualche modo
Now, the satellite does not have the antenna perfectly straight, aligned with the sides of the pyramid.
che andremo
The pyramid, let's say,
problema.
the strength like this. The satellite, however, is tilted in this way, and not only on this axis, but also on this other axis. So what happens
Tomografie che
is that when the signals are sent back, the ones that will later create this type of photograph, they get distorted due to the fact that this antenna is positioned in the way that is not what we would ideally choose to view the object perfectly along the X and Y axis.
una ricerca di questo tipo
The tomographies we will create have the same problem.
non si dice mai la mia
That is, they have a distortion that you need to be aware of.
stavo facendo questa
They are photographs distorted in this way for the reason, but once you know this, the problem is no longer an issue.
queste tomografie
When conducting a research of any kind, there is an element of awareness that never appears in textbooks. No one writes, my consciousness increased by 3 degrees while analyzing this data. But the truth is, awareness grows when you repeatedly examine something until you finally notice an essential detail.
diverso va bene.
When does consciousness increase? Consciousness increases when you look at the nail in the wall many times until you finally realize that there is a nail in the wall.
Cui in altro corrisponde
And in the same way, by looking at these photos, these tomographies, a spontaneous process of awareness acquisition arises.
allora si fa un'altra
The
cosa.
first time you look at it, you don't understand anything. You see, yes, you see that there is a triangle,
Cioè voi dovete
and you say, oh, you'll see,
entrando
those are the sides of the pyramid. Then you see that
la
it has different colors, and you say, well, because energetically the pixel corresponding to this photograph vibrates in a different way.
perché te tagli una torre
This energy at play, the computer, the software marks in with a different color. Yes, all right, we agree. then you start to see a strange colored tube descending at the center of the pyramid. But then we noticed a peculiar layered colored tube descending from the pyramid center, with another tube-like structure extending upward. Technically, there shouldn't have been anything there. To verify this, we took a north-south sectional scan image slicing the pyramid like a cake. This isn't a simple task. Tomographic data is highly complex, containing a vast amount of overlapping information. Our challenge was to isolate the relevant signals from those caused by background noise, reflections, and interference. Then we do another thing. We take images like this one, which is a starting image where it's basically a north-south image. You have to think that you are entering the image you are looking at, meaning you have the entrance of the pyramid in front of you. The slice we made in the middle of the pyramid is like a cutting cake. You see that cutting this cake isn't that simple, because when you cut the cake, you see the layers of the cake, cream, chocolate, and all stuff inside, candies, fruits. The tomography has a series of things that mess it up terribly, but they give you this mess. This is a scientific term. You'll see they give you more information because it's messed up. There's so much stuff inside, and your awareness in analyzing the various tomographies must be able to discern all the things inside, because tomography is a sonic photograph. Each pixel of that strip we calculated senses the information of all the pixels in that strip, but not only because it senses. The strip of the pyramid senses all the information of the things in front and all the vibration information of the things behind. So, this photograph not only tells you what is in the slice of the cake, but also tells you what's inside, in front, and behind. Only by knowing this can we search for what is contained only in the slice we've cut, trying to understand what has nothing to do with this vibration, because in reality it's connected to vibrations of things that are behind and vibrations of things that are in front. Now, why this tomography? The colors of this tomography represents the fundamental data of the energy of the pixels that move, the frequencies that move. We can immediately say that the outer part of the pyramid vibrates differently from inner part, because the colors of marked with this system, we tell the computer, show me these strong differences, and it shows them to you. Because if I tell the computer, show me the differences, but erase some signals, because I don't want to see them, the computer shows me that. The computer puts on filters, removes them, but does it after the relationships between the different things. On the other hand, the photograph is another matter. You take the tomographic image of the left and tell the computer, since I don't understand anything, help me to highlight some vibrations in the form of color. While others are not. What does that mean? It means that I'm helped to understand some information, but others on the right side are sometimes erasive or exaggerated, while the real information is given by the computer on the left side. Let's keep in mind these two methods, because we need both to understand and interpret the phonograms. Now that we know this, on the right side we see that the bottom part of this kind of canon descending really seems to be there. I assure you, we don't understand the thing. What is this? Maybe it's a reflection. The technique doesn't work with reflections. We take about this latter because here is a physical optical image. There are reflections. The sonic image has echoes. And if we were in the room and there was an echo, what is an echo? The reflection that instead of being light is sound reflection, and since we work with sound, there are sound reflections, so it was logical to see things that actually didn't exist but were ghosts. So we say, wait, change position, let's look from another side. And here's the fundamental problem. If I had to build a three-dimensional model, an object I can see, I can see from only one photograph. I need at least two scanning positions, but maybe two aren't enough. Let's say 3 x, y, and z, and then we have the starting image in front of us. On this other side.
Delle macchie colorate, io le vedo arancioni, voi non so di che colore le vedrete, ne vediamo due molto grandi.
In this compact the tomography we see, basically you can see north and south written down to show how we have arranged these things. And what do we see? First of all, we have flattened it, so it is no longer a pyramid in its usual shape, but almost a straight line now. In the middle we see colored spots. I see them as orange. I'm not sure that color you see them as. We see two very large ones, something in between and perhaps behind the large spot on the right. There is another spot that could be filtered back. At the center of these spots, there is definitely something, and on the left, there is a small spot further away, way in the back. We begin to notice that these spots have a structure, because we have brought both them closer together and applied a better Fourier transform. We have in some way brought this into better focus. How do we bring this into focus? It's simple. We take many measurements, many images. There is something in the middle, maybe behind the big spot of the right. There's another spot that could be filtered back towards the center of these marks. There's definitely something there, and on the left there's a smaller spot. Further away, maybe in the back. Now, we're starting to see that these marks have a structure. By bringing them closer together and applying a better Fourier transform,
su questa lastra tutto quello che c'è davanti e tutto quello che c'è di dietro, se voi notate bene, quando il radar non è l'antenna perfettamente parallela a quello che vogliamo vedere, ma è piegata, è come è uguale, è come se l'antenna fosse dritta e fosse piegata all'immagine. Cioè,
What the human eye perceives in terms of awareness
perché ne vediamo una
is, okay, there's something above,
e se voi guardate
but then wait a minute, there's also something below.
abbiamo sempre uno, due,
Are they just reflections?
cose
Perhaps,
dietro,
but we were
altre cosette che non sappiamo
beginning to detect the structure,
una cosa molto complessa.
something that no one had ever seen before inside the pyramid of Khafre.
Un lato
On the upper level, certain elements seem to vibrate differently. How many are there? If you look to the left, you see two very distinct ones.
pare come un piano
Something else appeals toward
certo
the center, and at least a couple more are on the right. Then, all the way to the far right, there's a well-defined structure. The rest appears to be below, but we need to be careful. We need to analyze things more
il piano che l'occhio umano ha
precisely. So let's examine these large structures and try to understand their composition. We immediately focused on them because they were the most visible.
una struttura di qualcosa.
The ones with the least error margin. Now, let's look at them here on.
Se voi le guardate,
In this tomography, the entrance of the pyramid is on the right.
e ce ne sono
You go down, and somewhere below is the Bezodis chamber, which is invisible. I'll explain why later. Everything we see here is above. At the front, there are two layered structures.
allora bisogna aumentare la
You see them?
Andiamo a vedere
5 layers
strutture
with
grandi,
a sort
cerchiamo
of
di capire come sono fatte perché
pagoda-like
abbiamo
roof.
contato subito.
Being
Quelle
one
funzionano meglio, cioè
on the right, there's another very similar structure, but behind
anfas.
the one on the left, nothing is visible.
Tenete
In
presente
the
che
center,
questa cromatografia si entra da
top,
destra,
there's another bright spot. Let's analyze it future.
dove ci sarà da
Let's get help from the computer. Their computer, if you can highlight some structural details for us, and
tutto quello che si
at
vede
that moment something clicked. We had seen this structure before.
sono due cose che sembrano
Look,
fatte a
the one on the left. 5 levels with what we might for now call
destra si vede
a
che c'è
goblet roof.
che è molto
Below you can see a slightly darker square.
però al centro
This remained at us for something.
ci facciamo aiutare
New looking at the right side, we can see more or less the same structure, and behind it, if you observe carefully, there's another one that resembles the one in front. Let's zoom in even further. I've also included RGB graphs, blue, green, and red, because in this case, we processed only specific color range. See that little circle with a question mark in the lower left section? It looks like there's something inside. But what on earth does this remain of?
ancora vederla nel modo un pochino più
Let's take another look at it from a distance.
grafici dell'RGB del colore.
You know, when you don't understand something, you need to step back and try and see if it makes more sense.
Un cerchietto con un punto interrogativo.
At first, it didn't seem to match, but then we realized that we had already seen it before.
La mappa del territorio.
Filippo actually showed it to you in his presentation. It's a room with a Z shape
Ma
on
questa
top.
l'avevamo già vista, anche Filippo ve l'ha fatta vedere.
and look closely inside. The room on the left, there's a strange little spot.
Guardate che forse
Could it be something?
la stanza
We don't know, because we had to sacrifice half of the radar synthesis to use this other half
proviamo a saperlo.
to extract the colors of the tomography.
Del radar per
How many of these structures are there?
l'altra metà della sintesi.
It seemed like there were 5 in total, based on all the
Di
tomographies.
questa roba qui.
The only way to be sure was to look from above,
Bisognava
cutting the pyramid horizontally to get a clearer view inside.
perché dall'alto si sarebbe visto bene.
On the left,
La piramide
we have a photo of the Khafre pyramid, sliced in half like a sandwich. But when you look at it, it's hard to make sense of anything.
della
So we asked to the computer process the image to enhance
e
it.
te la guardi e non ci capisci niente e dici al computer allora me la fai vedere meglio perché porca puttana se no e così otteniamo la visione a destra e vi faccio subito vedere una
But the most important thing is that these elements fall into two categories. Those that are easy to see and those that are more difficult to distinguish.
c'è una
Now, let's talk about these bright spots.
che è una
These are phonal light spots.
questo lo risolviamo
What we're seeing here is a pyramid illuminated from the outside, and those patches of light are phonon reflections.
ma ci sono
That lower left spot, it's exactly what happens in our tomography when sound creates an echo.
queste sono una piramide
We
in qualche modo
encountered the same thing in the Great Pyramid of
queste
Knul
sono
Khufu.
macchie di luce fononica. Quella
At first, you might
a
think,
sinistra
damn,
basso è
this echo is interfering with the data,
fotografia.
but actually it provides valuable information.
Era già successo nella
In fact, every time we conduct a top-down tomography, we can instantly determine the north-south orientation,
darà delle informazioni.
because the phonon reflection always appears on the same side. So we gathered all this data and aligned every bright spot across the tomographs. From a top-down perspective, one crucial detail becomes clear.
Tutti questi dati
The center of the pyramid is not exactly the middle of the tomography square, but slightly shifted.
devono essere sempre le stesse.
Why? For two fundamental reasons.
Si vede
The radar image is slightly distorted,
piramide
stretching the pyramid in a way that makes it look more like a rectangle than a square.
perché
As a result, one side of the pyramid has compressed data, while the other side has more spaced out data.
sembrava una fotografia veramente
The actual center aligns with Belzoni chamber.
proprio quadrato, ma
You can see it as a small circular area in the tomography.
l'altra parte della piramide lì
Behind data, there are four structures.
dentro è
The fourth circular shape that appear consistently in every tomography from north to south, east to west. They are always in the same position. When we construct a 3D model, we will match it to the tomography by testing it until we replicate the exact same optical effect.
capisci esattamente
It may sound simple now, but this process took 3, maybe 4 months just to correctly identify all the bright spots and their corresponding structures in different tomographies.
il modello
You'll be able to verify this yourself when we publish everything online, including this slideshow Then you can go back and analyze the image to check whether we've been misleading you or if we've generously spent our time wisely to help you understand the key points without wasting yours. Now let's go back to the main findings. We've identified something crucial. For approximate center of the pyramid, two bright paths extend downward, slightly offset to the left. These two paths also extend upward. Now remember the structure of the pyramid. Below there are two tunnels, one entrance at ground level that goes underground before rising back, up, and another that starts from above. These tunnels are stacked on the top of each other. If the radar is positioned directly above them, we see them as one on top and the other. But if the radar is slightly off center, they appear side by side. This is why they seem like two separate paths, even though they are actually part of the same boundary system. There are also brighter and dimmer spots. We'll understand why later. The brighter spots appear that way because there is something both above and below them, amplifying the vibration at that point. When there is nothing below, we only see the vibration of the upper structure and vice versa. And then there are these strange bluish holes. They surround the bright areas, but they vibrate less and are much fainter. They are there, but they are much harder to see. But the fundamental thing is, what is the thing? On the right, there are at least two luminous paths that go from the bottom to the top. I just want to point out that if you look at these two luminous paths, in the lower right corner, they slowly move your eyes upwards, then notice that every now and then the simplest thing was there. There was an horizontal path, TR, as if they were a comb, like the teeth of a comb. And if you look closely, I don't want to waste your time, and you can do it at home later. If you want, in some areas of the vibrations, the comb teeth are equally spaced.
In alcune zone di queste vibrazioni, i pettini, i denti dei pettini hanno tutti la...
What Filippo did was take the pyramid and cut it at different points, at various levels. Look at the top left of the pyramid. Is always there. The same distortion of the pyramid, right? As the radar sees it, it cuts in position 1, position 2, position 3, and position 4. Let's look at the tomographs, at the different heights. The higher the tomography gets to the object you're looking at, the more accurate the focus becomes, meaning the precision increases. Indeed, this is the first step. Number 4 is much more precise, less blurred than number 1. In number 1, you see these strange cones, distinct viewed from above. But in number 1, there are fewer. In number 2, there are more. In number 3 there are even more, and in number 4 there are even more, almost at ground zero.
2, 3, 4 non corrispondono.
Keep in mind, I have tell you this to you.
Il lato
Understand, this small square,
la piramide
not the small square we have here, 1, 2, 3, 4,
è che la
does it correspond to a square because there is the trippa effect.
un lato che è il lato
The side of the pyramid, meaning the pyramid being a square, what you see here is that the strip
di luce
containing these strange combs is located under what side, which is the American West side and of the pyramid.
sotto
In this context, in the tomographs, you can see that the light spot enters from the left.
solo la metà in
The entry is almost below the spot,
quadrato della piramide di
and so the comb is exactly below the ground zero,
dovevamo andare
under the side at the head of the
in
pyramid.
alto a sinistra ci abbiamo
So in this case, the tomography that
della piramide
interests us is only the upper half of the square of the pyramid.
messa in questo modo
Becomes a rectangle.
prima. Noi ci
But what is the strange structure that is this thing here?
sinistra a destra
We need to look closely. You can see in the top left with the usual spots.
la guardi finché te non hai capito
We know the entrance to the pyramid is below the spots. Let's look at something else,
cioè te
because we don't care about what we saw earlier. We want to focus on the side of the side
fotografie
where
tomografie vedendole dall'altra parte
there's something moving from the left to the right,
guardiamola bene da vicino sta roba
and underneath something that looks like
ti fa
combs.
vedere
So what do you do?
che sostanzialmente ti
You apply awareness, meaning you look at it until you understand what it is. Of course, there's an effect that some fool might call
così che in basso
pareidolia,
di luce che corrisponde
meaning at some point you see what is it there.
vediamo
But now that's what you see, you can see again with increased awareness in all other tomographies, seeing them from different parts, changing your point of view, changing the map of the territory. Let's look at it closely now.
l'antenna dritta ma
So the top part shows you. I've removed the colors because they are basically phononic.
guardate in basso
They are extra information that isn't indeed here.
si tratta di diapano
When we look at this, you see I've oriented on the right the little square of the pyramid's base, so that below you have the light areas corresponding to what we are about to examine.
di cosa si tratta
In the bottom left, we see that luminous spot shaped like tuning forks. They look like tuning forks, all lined up, appearing shifted. This way because I remind you that antenna isn't straight with the pyramid. It's tilted.
del suono nel granito
So it's like you have a straight antenna, but what you're looking is shifted. This tilt is caused by tilt of the radar antenna. Look at the bottom closely. When you look pretend you've understood that they are tuning forks. You can see that inside there are disturbance, there are lines going from left to right that are sometimes dark and sometimes reflective. guided the light until one day, after months, I realized what they are.
All'interno dei diapason non ce l'ho.
And at the top, I show you reconstruction.
Che sta
There are these forks, essentially tuning forks, shaped in the middle. There's a kind of rectangular from the radar sees. Let's assume it's granite. The speed of sound in granite is 4,000 meters per second. So it occurs transparent, like glass. Now image you have this thing with a rectangular glass rod inside. And there you go, the glass. Let's
e la parte di là
you see things in front in one way and things behind in a distorted way. This type of distortion is exactly what we see in the context.
la roba che vibra, che strano.
Only the acquisition of awareness makes you understand that things are like this, because otherwise you won't get to the bottom of it. So, in the end, what is the structure that emerges from this? What we see below is something that goes from left to right. 7 objects
Quello lungo.
that look like tuning forks, and inside these things forks. Thought I didn't include it. I'll show you later. There is another corridor, question mark, at the peak of the tuning forks. Curve like the top, and it covers the same distance from left to right. What we have is the purpose of such structure. That's a question we don't have an answer to look at the structure, for example.
Che è una piramide, se no manco quello sapevi. Allora cerchiamo di capire meglio, ci facciamo aiutare dal computer e subito appare una cosa interessante. In alto a sinistra vediamo un rettangolo nero. Questo rettangolo nero poi sulla sinistra possiede una serie di roba molto più
These giant tuning forks might be structural designed to support something.
vuol dire che
The one on the left, for example, is the roof of a library in Dutch or Norwegian city. It's a giant library, probably designed for something else. But they didn't know what to do with it, so they turned it into a library. The one on the other side is a structure supporting a dam. So structures like this do exist, and they evidently have a particular use. But how strange tuning forks, right? When we are looking at things that vibrate, strange, isn't it? Let's move on. Let's leave it suspended for a moment. Let's perform another tomography. The other tomography essentially shows the south of the left, on the left, north on the right. And we are seeing only one side of the pyramid, the long slanted one that stretches for the center to the right. Clearly we get the impression that the other side of the right side is much steeper. Why does it happen? For the usual reason, the antenna. Notice that we've used different types of radar, so depending on the inclination of the different antennas, you shouldn't expect the same slope in all tomographies, because it's not like that. What do we see here? You look at it and think, I don't get it. The only thing you can understand is that there's a pyramid that looks like this. for the king, because you know it's a pyramid. Otherwise, you wouldn't even know that. So let's try to understand better and use the computer to help us. Immediately, something interesting appears. In the top left, we see a black rectangle. This black rectangle on the left has a series of much brighter objects that vibrate, meaning they have a higher energy than black, on other hand, means less vibrations. Next to the shameful objects, on the left side, there's a square of the same size as the black rectangle. It's less black, but it's there. Let's try to bring it out better. If we change the colors again, at the bottom, we see the rectangle, which has once black, now tuned orange. I think you can see the color, but what color is exactly? At the far end, you can see the little square at the same height and the same color. And in the middle, we see, well, now we know that they are at the little bits that represent the Z structure. If we hadn't done the other tomographies, we wouldn't know what they were. But here we can see them, and if you count them carefully, there are 5. Let's take a closer look at this and search for the more information. So we have a black rectangle on one side and another black square on the other side. The 5Z structure in between. What could the black rectangle be if not a place where there's nothing? Meaning it doesn't vibrate except for the girl inside. So this rectangle probably isn't actually a rectangle, because we have to remember that the side on the right looks slanted. The higher of these two objects is the same because the error made on the right and left is roughly the same. But on the left and right, not top and bottom, things are different because one side of the pyramid has been stretched. So, where are these objects? The object you see as the black rectangle is on the one that appears in the arrow and the bottom of the tomography on the right. It's the object we've already seen in the other tomographies. Go back and check it. It's the one we identified with the arrow on the left, the smallest chamber. Let's call it that. Is the arrow on the right. At the top, where there's this extremely bright area, I point out that these two chambers are connected. You can see at least one path that connects the side of the lower chamber with roughly the center of the upper chamber. You'll notice this path is split, and if you look closely, you'll discover there are other pseudopaths connecting the other spots, and other and that there are the Z structures which can be seen better here. We needed to do another tomography because we keep going until we understand. This time, let's look at the tomography on the right, where you enter the pyramid on your right. You see a darker rectangle where the far side is lower, making it appear lower than the side that connects the far end to the near end. Notice that in the middle there are dark spots and a path that could be one of the paths from the entrance toward the dark spot, which, with a bit of imagination, could possibly be the Benzoni's chamber, with only the roof visible. Then you look below and think, oh, there aren't the usual things coming down. What is that thing? Can you show me that more clearly? Look, if you pay attention, you'll see things that are going down, and they seem to be widening. Yes, widening shapes, if you look at both the left and right, where we only have shifted colors. You discover what it looks like. These objects are once again on the two planes. When you see everything from a distance, the pyramid appears as a small pyramid with a spot coming down in the center. But when you get closer, you realize the spot is actually two spots, one behind the other. If you look from other angle, you start to see objects on one behind the other. The first results, of course, left us even more confused because we thought, well, let's look below, because we had already seen that under Khufu's pyramid there were two slopes entering and going down. Let's see if there is anything. And so we looked closer and discovered that they were reflections. The pyramid is almost flattened, and the top and below there are 8 tubes, 8 paths that go down. These are characterized by the trippa effect. Remember that, the trippa effect. So, you're looking at the pyramid, where once again you enter from the north. You'll see the two most important Z structure in the center because they are marked by a strong detection. A little bit at the top, which somehow identifies the roof. Look, the pyramid is flattened like this, so think of it this way. You're looking from the beginning of the Z shapes to the end a little above. That's why the pyramid roof is above the tomography at 137 meters, so we've flattened it. And you realize that at the ground zero, all the way to the ground, there's quite a lot of paths, a lot of stuff. Now, how are these channels arranged? They're placed in 2 rows, and you can see the brighter and the dimmer ones. What does it mean? The brighter and the dimmer ones depend on the distance from the tomographic plane. and the object that vibrates. Let's assume for a moment that the objects are the same. If one is farther away and you focus it on it differently, it will vibrate differently and therefore be brighter or dimmer. But they could be, as we concluded, reflections. We need to understand more. So let's examine them closely. Increase the resolution and increase the number of accumulations of the synthesis. What appears is this: a row of 4 objects in front, and another row of 4 behind. To examine it more closely, we stretch the image. We then use artificial intelligence to enhance it, resulting in a 16% improvement. Further, we instructed the software to refine the interpretation of the bright regions, revealing an intriguing detail. We divided this vertical object in 2, 3, or 4 sections. The leftmost section presents the complete path in a small image. As you can see, the upper portion is significantly enlarged. However, around the midpoint, the outer layer of the object mysteriously vanishes, leaving only the inner core visible. It appears as if one object is contained within another, a truly fascinating observation. This phenomenon may explain the 3 distinct levels of luminosity observed in the descending object. It's crucial to note that this is not a simple gradient. While the decrease in brightness from front to back is expected due to the vibration absorption by the object material, the presence of 3 distinct luminosity levels suggests something unusual is occurring.
Allora, cosa si è fatto? A questo punto si è detto, allontaniamoci ancora un po' e guardiamo.
We still had to observe everything with a more distant perspective. So, what happened at this point? It was decided to step back a bit further and look from a distance, trying to include in this tomography the pyramid we are looking at, the one in the center to the left. You can see that there's the pyramid of Menkaure beyond it. Keep in mind that the scan we made cuts the pyramid of Khafre in half, but you can still see 3 sides of the pyramid. The one sloping to the left, the one sloping to the right, and in the middle, where there is this dark column, you can see the vibration of the other 2 edges of the pyramid, which are behind it. The pyramid is transparent and 3 edges are darker. If you take a bell that is not round but square and strike it with a mallet, the bell will ring. But if you strike on the edges of the pyramid itself won't make a sound. We are looking at the edges of the pyramid, the front and the back, which are not vibrating, and this creates a dark cone, a darker blue. This is why there's that dark area there. I mention this so that we can learn to interpret tomography scans. Sometimes it's not about knowing everything, it's about understanding how to interpret what we see. While observing this, we notice that in this tomography, now our eyes can pick out the nail in the wall. We can see it. Even though we didn't intentionally highlight it, we can now see the things descending in lighter shades of blue. We know now that there aren't reflections. When we look down, still on the tomography on the left, we see that at the bottom there's a kind of rectangular area, a small square with something luminous inside. It's a square of rectangular flat surface with something vibrating inside. We try to highlight this, and then we do our usual color changing trick. On the right, we examine the vibrating object, and with this method, we can see two important things. On the right, we can observe almost 1, 2, 3, almost 4 of the 8 cubes descending in the underground. The terminal part's intense vibration makes these features visible, explaining their heightened luminosity, consistent with our other tomography observations. However, let's examine this more closely. The descending elements on the left are obscuring our view. What could they be? Adjusting the color palette reveals a square of rectangular patch and at least 6 descending tubular objects. The brightest area is closest to the pyramid's base plates. On the right, circles highlight the bases of 3 descending objects, prompting further investigation. From the Khafre pyramid's upper section, drawn segments align with the deep rectangle edges. To determine the altitude, we'll use the pyramid's 143-meter height and pixel counts. Focusing on the rectangle in the lower region, we see 2 luminous entities surmounted by an entrance into a luminous cube-like structure. 4 objects descend into the depth and 4 more into the adjacent cube. This is also faintly visible in the right tomography, which better shows these cubic structures and descending objects. A space separates the cubes. One might dismiss this as pareidolia, but does artificial intelligence experience pareidolia? Can't it fabricate perceptions or identify illusory shapes? Technical, no, as pareidolia is psychoanalytical. Therefore, we ask the computer to analyze the region. We observe 2 cubes with a smaller cube between them. The left cube's processing reveals 4 descending objects in gray and brown more clearly. We ask that AI watch it detected. It identified 2 cubes with differing resolutions, highlighting the 4 tubes' darker streaks in the lower right. We reverse the process, isolating the left cube. Its edges are clearly highlighted in dark, and spirally enclosed tubes descend from above into it. We observe 2 or 3 vibrating objects entering the cube directly. We then attempt a topographical reconstruction, generating a 3D image. This 3D tomography reconstruction in various light gradations shows the spiral path recreated in chrome-like color, depicting chambers receiving these shafts from above. The chambers are approximately 80 meters per side, located at a specific distance from the surface, which I will detail shortly. The subsequent 3D resolution simulates the chamber illuminated by radar from a special position, thus returning vibration based on the angle on which the subject object was influenced. You can see that the same things appear in the tomography, not only in tomography number 3, the light one, where we have imposed the tubes to be made of glass, because to us the tubes seems like glass. We can also see the other part of the spiral. Imagine this as a winding staircase descending. What do you notice in the first view? The yellow colors, the intensity of yellow are 3, not 2. What does this mean? It means that you don't see everything clearly in front and everything in the back is very dark. But behind, there's a slight darker area, then a lighter one, and another darker zone. What does this mean? It only means one thing. There's a tube inside another tube, as we saw in one of the tomographies earlier. Actually, there's a hollow tube, not a column.
Bisogna dire che evidentemente è proprio così. Abbiamo fatto il contrario. Con un trucco computeristico abbiamo tolto il primo cubo, quello che sta sulla sinistra, e abbiamo cercato di guardare solo quello che c'è sulla destra. Guardate, sulla destra si vede chiaramente che gli spigoli di questo cubone grosso sono evidenziati in scuro e la roba che scende dall'alto, che sembra questa molla strana, entra nel cubo. E si vede perché ci sono almeno 2, se non 3 di questi oggetti che, la cui vibrazione è in nostro favore e entrano direttamente nel cubone. Allora è evidente che noi ora possiamo fare un tentativo di costruzione. E il tentativo di costruzione è quello che voi vedete. Ne abbiamo fatti diversi, ponendo diversi tipi di luci. Per quale motivo? In quello a sinistra vedete come il percorso a molla è stato ricreato con un colore che assomiglia un po' a quello della tomografia, con questi cuboni dove, qui non c'è fatto vedere perché non ci interessa, ma questi oggetti entrano in questi cubi, sono di lato 80 metri l'uno, 80 per 80, e stanno a una certa distanza dall'alto che ora vi dirò qual è. Nel mezzo vedete una risoluzione in 3D di come noi potremo vedere questa roba se illuminata da chi? Da un radar che in qualche modo illumina da una certa posizione e quindi ti restituisce come una luce le vibrazioni secondo la linea in cui l'oggetto è stato in qualche modo influenzato. E vedete che si vedono esattamente le stesse cose che si vedono nella tomografia. Non solo, nella tomografia numero 3, quella bianca, quella chiara, abbiamo imposto ai tubi di essere di vetro. Perché? Perché i tubi a noi ci appaiono sostanzialmente di vetro. Noi vediamo esattamente anche l'altra parte di spirale. Fate finta che sia una scala a chiocciola che scende. E cosa notate nella visione numero 4? Che i colori di giallo, le intensità dei colori di giallo sono 3, non sono 2. Cosa vuol dire questo? Vuol dire che te non vedi tutto quello che c'è davanti, bello chiaro, tutto quello che c'è dietro, bello scuro, ma dietro c'è una zona un po' più scura, poi una zona un po' più chiara, poi una zona un po' più scura. Cosa vuol dire questo? Solo una cosa, che c'è un tubo dentro un altro tubo, come si vedeva in una delle tomografie che avevamo visto prima. Cioè in realtà c'è un tubo vuoto, non c'è una colonna, è un tubo vuoto.
The current puzzle is what lies between these boxes. This is an image of that area, maximally stretched for detail. At first, it might appear confusing, but let me highlight something. Do you see the bright point in the center, on what we call the floor? There's a small rectangular shape indicated by the central bright spot. You can discern structures that appear cubical. The eye can detect them. And I show you them more clearly because this is the crucial element, the key to understanding, so to speak. I noticed 2 cubes, one on the right, which I've outlined with a dashed line, and one on the left, which I haven't. In the middle, there's a smaller cube with a brighter spot at its center. Now that you have seen this key element, if I reveal the highlighted area, you'll clearly see what I was pointing out.
Che come pavimento c'ha un punto più luminoso al centro. Ora che voi avete visto il chiodo nel muro, se io ve lo faccio scomparire, avete la possibilità di vedere esattamente quello che si stava mettendo in evidenza. Allora, a questo punto però bisogna capire una cosa fondamentale. A che profondità siamo? Sì, 80 metri è il lato di una di queste stanzone grosse. Facciamo fare i conti al computer. Il computer lo sa, perché sapendo che l'altezza è 137 metri, graficamente, contando il numero di pixel, vedete esattamente, questa volta abbiamo fatto il disegno preciso, che il punto finale dove c'è questo ripiano...
At this juncture, it's crucial to establish the precise depth. Yes, 80 meters represent the side length of one of these substantial chambers. Let's allow the computer to perform the calculation. Given the known height of 133 meters and the pixel count, the computer can determine the exact depth. We created a precise rendering, and the terminal point where the square platform with the two column absorbing cubes is located is at 648 meters. You see it displayed in this manner, but we have instructed the computer to rescale the image to reflect a realistic aerial radar view. Thus, this is the perspective one would obtain when flying over the zooming. The pyramid at the summit and significantly at the base, the pyramid height is 147 meters. We are descending to approximately 648 meters with a margin of error. This potential error stems from the radar's slight misalignment with the pyramid. A more accurate calculation employing the Pythagorean theorem might yield a mirror variation. However, since the error incurred with the 143 meters measurement is consistent with that of the 648 meter measurement, we can confidently affirm the depth as 648 meters. Notably, 648 is a double of 324, and 324 holds fundamental significance as an evident number, as I term it, the length of both the spatial and temporal axis. Dividing 324 by 2 yields 162. Recall that 100.618 is the golden ratio. Bear this in mind, as this data may prove valuable in future analysis. Now, similar tubular structures exist worldwide. If these structures exist today, does that mean that builders of the pyramids were the first to construct them? Consider the well of San Patrizio in Italy. When you look at it, you might think, wow, it looks exactly like that other one. Sure, it's smaller, shorter, and slightly different, but notice how it's made of interjoined elements with a hollow center. Fascinating, isn't it? Take, for example, the singular Gateway.Armando in India. There are several such structures in India, and their dating has been inaccurate from a scientific perspective. Why? Because you can't use carbon-14 dating on stone. You have today the artifacts associated with them. This same issue arises in Derinkuyu, one of the many underground cities in Turkey. While it's possibly the most well-known, it's not the largest. Their city contains numerous wells that descend with the usual winding staircases. It's interesting to note that the exact construction data remains uncertain, although historians have dated it to a specific period before Christ based on the discovered artifacts that only proves someone used the site during that era, not that they built it. The reality is someone may have stumbled upon it, used it, and discarded their belongings, just as we do today. For instance, if we found cans dating back to 600 BC, that doesn't mean that structures themselves were built at that time. Speaking of discoveries, look to the left. You see a massive chamber, almost a perfect cube, with an obelisk inside. What is this strange structure? One of the well, 80 meters deep. Imagine that over 2,000 years ago, people were supposedly digging something like this by hand. Could it really have been ancient wanderers with nothing better to do than carve holes into the earth? That's one way to look at it.
No, basta saperlo, io. E allora, a questo punto però ancora, noi chiediamo all'intelligenza artificiale cosa ne pensa di questa roba. E noi gliel'abbiamo chiesto, e l'intelligenza artificiale gli abbiamo posto la tomografia. Gli abbiamo detto, senti, questa è una tomografia, te cosa ci vedi dentro? L'intelligenza artificiale è incredibile. Questa è una tomografia fatta con la tecnica s.a.r, radar d'apertura sintetica, già sapeva tutto. Bene.
At this point, we turn to artificial intelligence and ask what it thinks about all this.
Punto numero 1.
We presented it with the tomography and asked, What do you see here? The results are incredible. This tomography, performed using the s.a.r. radar technique, already contained a wealth of information. The first key finding, the presence of void. The AI analyzes the data, confirming what we observed. After processing our input, it responds. The darker blue areas in the radar scan indicated underground voids, which could suggest the presence of natural or artificial cavities, possibly related to vertical shafts or hypothetical tunnels. In other words, it's essentially drawing conclusion from the data, just as we have. The vertical structures are clearly visible, and AI highlights the more linear bands extending vertically in the scan, which could correspond to shafts of underground columns. This aligns exactly with what I have described. Additionally, the AI detects horizontal structures anomalies and even suggests the possibility of similar informations. Then it goes a step further. Let me sketch what I see. The AI generates a 3D model illustrating both the horizontal and vertical planes. While we can be certain that this representation is entirely accurate, it's what the AI interprets from the data. Now, who created this AI? The expert in charge. So they can't just turn around and claim the pyramids are completely solid inside, because their own creation contradicts them. If AI confirms our findings, they can simply dismiss them. That's how this works. Now let's move on to the 3D model of everything we have observed. Take a look. We are flying over the structure. That feature you see, which looks like a straight floor, actually indicates the presence of water at a depth of about 35 meters, preventing us from seeing what lies beneath. The shafts extend much deeper, but at the bottom you notice two boxes, which are believed to represent the rooms of Amenti. Pay close attention to the clear view from below. On the left, you can see the diapason. Additionally, we can observe exactly 5 jet pillars, all interconnected through the pathways identified in previous tomographies. As you position yourself within the model, you notice that the conditions align precisely with those in the tomographies we developed, revealing the same interferences we detected in reality. Let's take a closer look. If you can clearly see these 5 objects linked together by lighter pathways that connect to the more defined edges on the southeast and southwest sides, interestingly, there is no horizontal path on the north side. The north side is where the entrance is located, the passage leading to Belzoni's chamber and the lower chamber. However, as May pointed out, this lower chamber is inaccessible due to the scan pyramid project, which is creating complications. As a result, it remains almost invisible, such a small, seemingly insignificant part of the entire structure that technically, yes, we can expand the image and view it from a different angle. Sometimes the jet objects appear as 5 distinct structures, while other times they seem stacked on behind the other, aligned with the same vertical path. Their appearance changes depending on the point of observation, just as we observed in the tomographies. We still don't know how exactly what they are, but they mimic the precise contours seen in the scans. At the bottom, there is a large room on the right and a smaller room on the left, positioned behind the jet-shaped objects. These rooms are located exactly where we saw them in previous tomographies. From the entrance side, you can clearly see them. The entrance and everything we currently know about the Pyramid of Khafre is situated beneath ground zero, the pyramid's baseline. The top of the Belzoni chamber the chamber roof slightly breaks above this level. The two known shafts were evidently used for water drainage, as I explained in a previous conference. Water enters because it serves specific functions we have already described, but it must also exist. These two structures, designed to channel water out and prevent the pyramid from flooding, must be positioned a few meters above the water level, meaning they are also above ground zero. This is why the roof is designed the way it is. Having a 3D model is incredibly useful, as it helps to contextualize and accurately reconstruct the tomographies. When viewing a tomography from this specific perspective, you can only see three jet objects: the one in front, the one in the middle, and the one behind. These are connected by two rooms, one larger and one narrower. It is evident that these structures extend even deeper. Between ground zero and the two yellow boxes, there is a depth of 648 meters. In some cases, as seen here, the jet on the right slightly reveals part of the one behind it, just as it appeared in tomography taken from these elevated viewpoints.
Da questa posizione di Z ne vedi solamente tre: quello davanti, quello nel mezzo e quello dietro, con le due stanzette, quella larga e quella più stretta, collegate tra di loro. È evidente che a un certo punto tenete sempre presente che questi oggetti scendono ancora più in giù.
We can see that the blue spots represent the 8 objects observed from above, descending toward the bottom. Why do they appear so faint? We'll find it out soon. In 1968, the Moon spectroscopy was first applied to the Khafre pyramid. A camera for detecting muons was placed in Bezzoni's chamber, positioned below, inside the chamber, to observe something above, as Filippo Biondi argues. However, we don't need to dig 2 kilometers underground just to place a camera and see what's above. We observe everything from above. In contrast, they had to position a camera inside the pyramids and wait for a muon to pass through and leave its imprint on a plate. The camera was centrally located, as evidenced by an old image from 1968. The technique, pioneered by Luis Alvarez, the Nobel Prize winner, and exactly as Armando may suggest, is far from arbitrary. What was the result? They concluded, "We have no doubts." Can you imagine an Anglo-Saxon admitting to doubts? They stated, "We have no doubts. If there were a chamber or something similar to the king's chamber in the Khufu pyramid, in the Khafre pyramid, or in any other pyramid, we would immediately see it." They photographed the entire area at a 35-degree angle, taking measurements and finding nothing. So, rest assured, nothing is there. This conclusion later led Zahi Hawass to claim that muon spectroscopy doesn't work. By making such an official statement, he ultimately contradicted himself, because he later admitted that muon spectroscopy did detect something in the Khufu pyramid. If the technique didn't work, why acknowledge its findings? He should have been more cautious and avoided such contradictory statements. Nevertheless, this was the scientific work published in 1968, and now we need to understand why this happened.
Khufu, anche nella piramide di Khafre o in qualsiasi altre cose, figurati se noi non la vediamo. Se c'è una grande galleria, la vediamo subito. Se ci sono la stanza della regina è lì sotto, la vediamo immediatamente. Perché noi fotograferemo con un angolo di 35 gradi tutto quello che c'è nel mezzo. Bene, fanno le misure. Noi non abbiamo trovato una mazza. C'è scritto così, tradotto in inglese dall'italiano. No, c'è scritto. Quindi state tranquilli, non c'è niente. E su questa dichiarazione si scatena anche Zaki Hawass dicendo sicuramente la spettroscopia muonica non funziona. E nel dire questo, a livello pennellistico, non si rende conto di darsi la zappa sui piedi. Perché? Perché dopo dirà la spettroscopia muonica ha fatto delle resistenze, ma dopo dirà la spettroscopia muonica nel caso della piramide di Cheope ha trovato qualcosa. Ma come? Se non funzionava? Cioè non funzionava, te di almeno da furbo non c'è niente, così non ti dai le martellate sulle palle. Invece questo è il lavoro scientifico che è stato sostanzialmente pubblicato. 1968. Allora, bisogna capire perché questa cosa è successa. Questa è la piramide come noi la vediamo.
Here's the pyramid depicted in the diagram. Now I'm overlaying the 35-degree cone required for observation. When I apply this cone, something incredible emerges. It doesn't intersect any of the surrounding jet-shaped objects. So even if these objects exist, the muons can detect them. They were simply unlucky. Moreover, the central jet is situated in the narrowest part of the cone, where the muon capture is least likely. This is typically in an area where nothing is detected. Let's take a closer look. As you can see, the cone completely misses everything. Muon spectroscopy didn't fail. It was simply a mistake to place the photography machine under Belzoni chamber. Perhaps that's why they have now moved the machine to the lower chamber and have allowed us to see what's inside. But if there is nothing there, why spend all that money from 1968 to 2025 just to try again by changing position and spending millions? They have been working on this for years, involving 12 to 15 institutions worldwide and 32 people, spending money and taking one picture every 8 months, waiting months between each muon's arrival from above. No one, however, was impressed that we discovered 19% of the injured chambers inside the pyramid simply by conducting research from without spending a dime.
Facendo una fotografia ogni 8 mesi, perché ci vogliono i muoni. Se i muoni non ci sono, la pellicola non si...
The problem is, look at what all the newspaper made a big deal about during the famous Camp Pyramids. We have found 2 voids, one big and one smaller. The big void seen in the center is often depicted in other scientific articles as being bent. Why? Because the authors themselves state in their work that they don't know if the big void is horizontal or if it has an angle. Why don't they know? Because they only detected 5 muons passing through it over a distance of 70 meters. Could this have been 5 small big voids, one stuck to another? We'll never know. How high is the big void? We'll never know, because the technique's limitation prevent us from determining that. You must understand that it is impossible to detect the external 4 jet structures inside the pyramid, let alone the central jets, once 3 muons pass through by chance and interact with the numerous empty parts within it, since the jet is about 70% empty. The muon technique will never be able to detect the existence of internal structures inside the pyramids. It's simply not possible with this method. Yet they know there is something inside. It probably bothers them that we have found something, so they try to catch up by claiming that they have discovered something inside the monument, perhaps a small room or 2, similar to what we have already uncovered today using s.a.r. technology. And that, in turn, makes us happy.
Interagiscono con le parti vuote dello Z, che sono tantissime, perché sono sostanzialmente lo Z è vuoto al 70%. Se voi ci pensate come cubatura, Quindi è impossibile con questa tecnica.
Now, let's discuss the structural data of the pyramids. Why aren't the known rooms and conduits clearly visible through s.a.r? It's because the pyramid was built with a large limestone platform at the base. Without this supporting slab, the pyramid would sink into the sand. In fact, without it, the pyramid would have collapsed 5 or 6 meters below the surface today. Essentially, we can approximate this slab from either side. Looking from the left, assume it functions as a beam. This beam is supported by 4 pillars, the 4 tubes we see from the front, which ensure that the center of the pyramid is properly supported and prevents the monument from collapsing. However, when we view the pyramid from the opposite side, the beam appears in section as a cantilevered beam. This means it consists of a central section and 2 wings that extend outward. What you see, particularly at the bottom left, is the bending curve. The more weight applied in the middle and the shorter the distance between the supports, the more pronounced the curve becomes. It rises and then falls again. This behavior is analogous to the tension seen in the cables of the Brooklyn Bridge, which is built in precisely this manner. Furthermore, granite and rocks in general, especially granite, raises compression extremely well, virtually not deforming under immense pressure. However, when subjected to shear stress, even a hammer blow can break granite. We needed to perform a more precise calculation to fully understand these dynamics. Assume there is a slab supporting the pyramid, and perhaps these 4 or 8 objects help support the entire slab that holds the pyramid, because without them, everything would collapse. In this graph, without showing you the numbers, we calculated the slab's dimensions to determine how tall it needs to be. Why I am explaining this? Because this slab exists. We can see it. And there are massive stones that not only form the pyramid's perimeter, but also extend several meters further to increase surface support. I consulted artificial intelligence about this, and after verifying the calculations, it suggests a minimum thickness of 4.5 meters for the slab. Without this thickness, the structure would collapse and sink by at least 10 meters. The AI recommended adding more limestone blocks around the monument at the base of the pyramid's area. When we redid the calculations, we found that by adding more limestone combined with the underground tube we detected through tomography, which increases the support area, the sinking would be reduced to 6 meters instead of 10, which is much less. I calculated the slab with the same perimeter as the pyramid, not one that extends 15 or 20 meters beyond it, and conducted that this configuration would definitely prevent the pyramid from collapsing. You can see that these wells serve at least one function: to hold everything up. Naturally, I wondered about the other pyramids. When we examined the old tomography of the Great Pyramid of Giza, we noticed something that we hadn't seen before: similar objects descending into the underground areas of the.
Io l'ho chiesto all'intelligenza artificiale, poi abbiamo controllato i conti, ma l'intelligenza artificiale dice spessore minimo della piastra 4,5 metri, perché se no casca tutto, cioè si sprofonda come minimo di 10 metri. Considerazioni, bisognerebbe metterci dei pali. E lo dice l'intelligenza artificiale, mi l'ho detto io, non l'ha detto Zacchiawas. E allora abbiamo rifatto il conto, e nel rifare il conto, si guadagna mettendoci dei pali, come li abbiamo progettati noi, con le dimensioni che più o meno vediamo dalle tomografie, il 31%. Cioè non scende più di 10 metri, scende di 6 metri sostanzialmente il cedimento. Ma io ho calcolato una piastra che aveva le stesse dimensioni della piramide, non una piastra che si espande per 15 metri all'esterno o 20 metri all'esterno, perché allora sicuramente anche di più la piramide non cade. vuoi vedere che questi oggetti hanno almeno una funzione? Almeno quella di reggere, perché se no... E allora, porca puttana, lì ci siamo chiesti. E le altre piramidi? Ed ecco che siamo andati a dare un'occhiata alle vecchie tomografie, quelle sulla piramide di Cheope. E lì ci siamo resi conto che non ci avevamo fatto caso. Ma porca puttana, ci sono anche lì gli oggetti che scendono. Nella piramide di Chefre, nella piramide di Micerino. E guardate, questa è una sezione. In questa sezione voi vedete come la roba nota l'abbiamo messa a livello della piastra. Quello che vedete è che noi non possiamo vedere, se non in modo, c'è un termine scientifico che si dice di culo, le vibrazioni di tutto questo percorso scuro, perché cade all'interno di questa piastra gigante, la quale assorbirà comunque tutte le vibrazioni. Il rapporto segnale-rumore di fondo.
Look at this section. The chamber and the corridors known were built inside the limestone slab. Due to the limestone slab, the satellite collected vibration are very weak. The vibrations from the entire network of tunnels and chambers within the slab are absorbed because of the stone's properties. What does this mean? Signal to noise ratio is low, so it's hard to detect the environment. But the roof-fall Belzoni's chamber extends above the slab. All the vibrations inside the slab aren't visible, but the vibration coming from the roof of Belzoni chamber are detected. Why design the spaces within the slab this way? It makes sense because we have always argued that the pyramid is a device, a kind of resonating bell used to collect vibrational information from the jets and transmit it to the lower level. The vibrations pass through the roof of Belzoni's chamber, which must be outside this hard base that would absorb all the vibrations, preventing it from doing what we have already described in previous conferences. At this point, we had to take a look beneath the Giza plateau. Down there are things that no one have never been seen before. So we broadened the analysis spectrum, adjusting the tomography to cover a wider area and allowing us to see deeper into the plateau. This requires more machine time because the Fourier transform spreads the chromatic image of a larger number of square pixels. So it takes a long time to gather the data. Now let's examine the pyramid of Khafre. We'll divide it in two. Notice carefully where north is located at the bottom of the image. Entrance to the pyramid is from the north. This is a satellite image, so it appears slightly distorted. On both the right and left, you can see how the slice we made to divide the pyramid appears. And the observer on the right will see the pyramid of Khafre is the object that vibrates more distinctly. The pyramid of Khnum-Khufu appears behind it, while the pyramid of Menkaure is farther away. But please note, the pyramid we are examining with the central tomographic section is Khafre's. As we look at it, there's a small section of Menkaure's visible in the background on the left, and in front of the right, the pyramid of Khufu obstructs data collection. What we see on the right might be caused by the pyramid of Khnum-Khufu.
La fotografia come si vede a sinistra, cioè quasi una dietro l'altra le tre piramidi, ma guardate, fate attenzione, la piramide che noi stiamo guardando con la sezione
This is the underground image captured between the pyramid of Khafre and the pyramid of Khufu. In the center, near the top, the pyramid of Khafre is clearly visible. Notice the black cone descending into the depth. These are the two wells that originate from the pyramid's two edges. Also in the center, you can see a cone that descends slightly, surrounded by the inichiosphere formation outlining the wells. Since that point is attached to the slab, it's clearly visible because materials in contact with one another vibrate more effectively. Similar structures appear on the right, where a brighter pathway eventually starts descending towards the center of the image. At the top, you can see the age of the pyramid of Khnum-Khufu, indicating that even beneath this pyramid there are descending features. Next, look at the lower left, where a luminous structure is visible beneath the pyramid of Menkaura. Its brightness indicates that it is vibrating. However, in this instance, we have chosen not to discuss the pyramid of Menkaura. The central arrow, on the other hand, highlights the cubes we mentioned earlier, which appear in a sort of pseudo-3D effect due to the satellite's tilt, giving us a distorted view of verticality. In the middle are the famous large cubes, at the height indicated by the arrow. From ground zero to that point, the depth is 648 meters, but there are another 600 meters below that. Let me point that out. Let's examine the cube's chamber more closely. You can see the edges of the cubes and how they are constructed, as they have been highlighted. These edges must be vibrating strongly, which is why they appear so clearly from a light perspective. The edges is always very prominent in this context. There are two cubes, and they are separated. In the center of the cubes, there appears to be a smaller cube or chamber. The dark stripe descending on the right, which I showed you earlier. Do you know what that is? Those are the two edges of the pyramid of Khufu. Although they appear in front of us on the right, they are actually behind the camera because the camera captured an image that compresses all the information onto a single plane, looking both forward and backward.
648 metri. Ma ce ne sono altri 600 più in basso, di roba che sta sotto. Ve lo faccio notare. Vediamo i cuboni da vicino. Vedete che si vedono sostanzialmente gli spigoli dei cubi, come sono fatti, perché sono stati messi in evidenza, e questi spigoli evidentemente devono avere una grossa vibrazione, perché si vede da un punto di vista luminoso, lo spigolo in questi contesti si vede sempre molto forte. E i cubi sono due, quindi, e sono staccati. Nel mezzo dei cubi ci deve essere quella scatoletta più piccola a cui vi facevo vedere prima. La striscia scura che scende sulla destra, lo sapete cos'è? Sono i due spigoli della piramide di Khnum-Khufu, che noi ce la troviamo davanti sulla destra, ma che sta dietro alla macchina fotografica, perché la macchina fotografica ha fatto un'immagine che va verso l'avanti e verso il dietro e ha compattato tutte le informazioni su un solo piano. Allora, questo per dire, andiamo ancora più da vicino, vedete che si vedono ancora meglio le strutture cubiche, che peraltro il computer ha detto sono dei cuboni.
Now let's zoom in even further. You can see the cube structures more clearly, and the computer has identified them as large cubes. Of course, there are other elements we can't identify because the only way to fully understand them is to visit the site. And what is it? At first glance, this reflection might seem like just a reflection, but it isn't. Let's examine it more closely. When we compress the image using what we call the tripe effect, the pyramid suddenly appears as a well-defined little pyramid at the center. Notice how the darker vibration in the middle becomes even more pronounced. We have significantly increased the contrast between the black and white areas and spaced them apart so you can see them more clearly. The dark stripe that descends is actually a small black score moving along two nearly parallel paths. We had seen this before, but what is it? Now consider the two pyramid models. We realize that beneath the pyramid of Khufu, which is on the right and corresponds in the tomography to something behind the observer, there are two small descending shafts. From above, you can see them, and they appear to be bands. In this scale model, the distances are accurate. So, what exactly is this feature? It lies beneath the pyramid of Khufu, as seen in the tomography. Notice how the pyramid of Khufu is the foreground but appears to be behind from the observer's perspective, due to the pyramid being cut in half. If you look below, you can clearly see that it is positioned exactly as in the work we published on remote sensing.
Sotto la piramide di Khufu. Lo ritroviamo in questa tomografia. Vedete com'è? La piramide di Khufu è quella davanti, che però sta dietro da chi in qualche modo sta osservando, perché la torta l'abbiamo tagliata a metà di Khafre. Dietro, sotto, si vede chiaramente che nella stessa posizione del lavoro che abbiamo pubblicato su remote sensing, che una signorina egittologa ha detto: ma sono solo macchie di luce, non si vede niente. Forse sarebbe meglio che la rivedesse, magari è daltonica, chi lo sa. Guardiamo la situazione com'è dall'alto. Questa è la situazione dall'alto. Vedete, ci sono le due piramidi che noi abbiamo messo con le dimensioni corrette. C'è la Sfinge sulla destra. Guardiamo se ci possiamo in qualche modo fare una tomografia in 3D. E se facciamo una tomografia in 3D, a un certo punto...
Let's observe the situation from an aerial perspective. This is the overhead view. You can see the two pyramids we have placed with their correct dimensions. The Sphinx is on the right. Let's see if they can perform the 3D tomography. If we conduct the 3D tomography, we can eventually see beneath the pyramid and explore what lies below. Wow, look at that. What a remarkable discovery down there. At this point, it's clear that based on this situation, we can begin to build a three-dimensional model, which we will soon do for the entire Giza Plateau. Because it's not sufficient to say, I studied the Pyramid of Khafre or I studied the Sphinx. No, we need to study the Giza Plateau as a whole, as Armando may rightly stated, within a single global context. Let's return to this image provided by Capella Space, which boasts the highest resolution worldwide. It simply doesn't get better than this. What are all these structures located beneath the pyramid, partially under Khafre Pyramid and Khufu Pyramid? What is all of that? Let's take a closer look. We slightly adjusted the view. You can see Khafre's pyramid in the center, while previously the apex of the pyramid and its two sides were positioned to the right and left. They are now arranged differently. This indicates we have shifted the tomography in this manner. And now, upon observation, you can see descending structures. Eventually, we'll understand the source of this confusion. However, down below, approximately 1,200 meters from the surface, there are square structures, resembling those found in Roman cities, that clearly indicates constructed formations, not random occurrences. We can clearly see everything we observed previously and more. There are objects, and there are many of them. This is an enlarged view, and you can now see that these structures, as you examine them, display vertical and horizontal alignments that are geometrically aligned with X, Y, and Z coordinates, all at right angles. Now you can claim these structures are fabricated or non-existent because this is tomography, a sonic image, not a subjective interpretation.
Del suono non è una interpretazione del primo che passa dalla strada. Questa tomografia qui ti fa vedere sostanzialmente il taglio che abbiamo fatto, e da qui si vede una cosa fondamentale. Guardate quanta roba scende.
This tomography essentially displays the cross-section we have created. From this view, a crucial detail emerges. Observe the extent of the descending structures. We will need to revisit our previous tomography for verification, and we are also conducting this analysis under the Pyramid of Khufu. Now we are consolidating this specific tomography, consistently centering the Pyramid of Khafre. This serves as the initial point for our research project. Below, descending columns are visible. We have compacted this, yielding a single object for analysis, and notably in the tomography on the left, square structures are discernible, which we can observe more clearly. Here, shafts descend, gradually diminishing and appearing pointed at their base. On the side, rectangular structures are present, which I will show you in greater detail. These are substantial chambers, and what you are observing is that the structure aligns with the columns descending from the Pyramid of Khufu, with the brightest column being the closest to the satellite radar. It is unrelated to the larger lighted chambers, as it belongs to a distinct structural complex. This is how tomography must be interpreted. Of course, all of this is corroborated by horizontal tomography. And in this tomography, we got carried away and decided to pick one of these wells to check it out. We chose the brightest one, which would give us more information on the upper left. Let me show you better.
Ecco come si interpretano le tomografie dopo che uno ci ha preso la mano. Ovviamente tutto viene comprovato dalle tomografie orizzontali, perché ora stiamo facendo lo scanning di tutta la piana. Ma non contenti di questo, abbiamo cambiato taglio. Mettiamoci a 90 gradi. A 90 gradi, sì, nel vero senso della parola.
Siamo in una botte di ferro.
Siamo in una botte di ferro, disse Muzio Scevola. Vedete la linea tomografica? Va dalla piramide di Khafre fino in fondo sulla sinistra alla Sfinge. Bene, in alto vedete la tomografia. Porca puttana, vedete tutta quella roba che scende. Quanta roba c'è che scende? Se voi giustamente sovrapponete la tomografia a quelle linee verticali vanno a rompere le palle a un numero identico di pozzi che ci sono nella piana di Giza e che nessuno ha mai scientificamente cagato. Questo vuol dire che quei pozzi lì scendono a una profondità di 1200 metri, più o meno sempre la stessa, in alcuni punti di più, in alcuni punti di
The Osiris tomb is believed to be the tomb of Osiris. Various claims have been made about it, and I'll illustrate something fundamental. Within the Osiris tomb, there are essentially 2 or 3 levels. It descends to 35 meters, beyond which the situation becomes unclear due to the watercourse surrounding a granite structure. This structure appears to contain a sarcophagus, or one of the many objects that might have been used for storage. Whether it was a sarcophagus, as the Greeks described a body eater, or a neb-ankh, as the ancient Egyptians called it, where neb signify a place where life is sheltered, not a body eater, is uncertain. We currently do not know the origin or destination of this water. Its chemical composition is entirely different from that of the Nile River. It follows a distinct path. One of our future objectives is to trace the subterranean water path as they exhibit peculiar behaviors. Some of these behaviors have been scientifically and technically studied by the geological work I've conducted and shared with fellow geologists has been criticized for its perceived inadequacies. Therefore, we need to re-evaluate all the data, as there are truly intriguing findings which we will present in the future. A fundamental characteristic is that at the first level, the entrance, and the second level, there is a series of chambers which we will examine more closely, containing the sarcophagus. This sarcophagus possesses the 2 key attributes. It is made of granite, not indigenous to Africa. Africa, and its method of entry is unknown, as it does not fit through the entrance. It weighs the standard 70 tons and is also slightly radioactive, likely originated from a mine in Turkey. The logistics of its transportation remain a mystery. I've included a map of the path alongside the tomography of the same path. As you can observe in the tomography, there is an initial vertical descent, followed by a first, second, and third step. The initial dark spots visible in the well are located at the third level, indicating a depth of 35 meters, with further structures below. Deeper still, there is in another dark area a small chamber. What do you believe it to be? Perhaps it's some kind of energy-related artifacts that vibrates uniquely, which explains its dark appearance. To me, it seems more likely to be a small room, or rather a large chamber. This feature extends even further down low, at least another 200 meters, based on initial pixel calculations. This has never been observed before yet. It's undeniable present. Why? Because it's detectable. This is a synthetic aperture radar image, which precisely replicated it. And we can identify it accurately because we recognize the structural pattern. Whenever we understand a structure's composition and examine the tomography, we can discern the colored spots as they correspond to the features we have identified within the Great Pyramid of Khufu. We had another advantage there, as we possess knowledge of 2 or 3 known structures, enabling us to recognize them. In Khufu Pyramid, we lacked prior knowledge of its internal structure, necessitating a more rigorous analysis to comprehend what we were observing. There's an initial vertical section containing numerous small rooms, and within one of them there's the sole remaining sarcophagus in the lowest level. This is the sarcophagus, or whatever it may be. Once again, we observe water entering from one side and exiting from the other, and this object within the water is subject to vibration. Does this evoke any memories of previous conferences?
Eravamo avvantaggiati perché avevamo 2 o 3 strutture che conoscevamo e abbiamo potuto riconoscere. Nella piramide di Khafre non c'era niente che conoscevamo all'interno della piramide e quindi abbiamo dovuto lavorare molto di più per capire che cosa avevamo di fronte. Quindi c'è un primo settore verticale dove ci sono tutte queste stanzette, in una di queste c'è l'unico sarcofago che rimane, nella parte più bassa, che è questa, c'è il sarcofagone, non lo so quello che è, ma ancora una volta abbiamo l'acqua che entra da una parte, l'acqua che esce dall'altra e questo oggetto che sta dentro l'acqua e ne subisce le vibrazioni. Non so se vi ricorda qualcosa di tutto quello che abbiamo detto nelle precedenti conferenze. Ecco. Allora, a questo punto però bisogna dire quali sono stati i nostri occhi. Il mio, uno solo, è mezzo ciecato, ma in realtà uno dei nostri occhi è stato Umbra Space, cioè questa specie di ombrellone gigante che attraverso la sua apertura ci ha permesso di avere un'apertura sintetica sostanzialmente favorevole perché noi si potesse comprendere tutte queste cose. E l'altro, quello che ci ha permesso di andare ancora più a fondo, è Umbra Space, Capella Space, il quale sostanzialmente, come vedete, è una specie di lenzuolone grande, aperto, rigido, e che ci permette di tirar fuori tutti i dati che sostanzialmente abbiamo tirato fuori. Morale della favola. Bisogna tirare delle conclusioni fuori, e le conclusioni sono abbastanza semplici. Per noi la piramide...
At this point, we must acknowledge the crucial contributions of our collaborators. One key partner was Umbra Space, which provided the synthetic aperture radar, enabling us to penetrate and understand these structures. The other, Capella Space, Offer the higher resolution radar, as you can see, allowing us to extract the comprehensive data we have accumulated. The key takeaway is that we must draw definitive conclusions, and these conclusions are quite straightforward. For us, the pyramid represents a repository of information, a vault that has been sealed by individuals with questionable motives. These individuals not only obstructed our access to areas we should have investigated long ago, but also impeded other researcher teams from doing the same. They are in essence consistently modifying these monuments, obscuring their original state, to prevent us from comprehending the pyramid's true purpose. Therefore, the synthetic aperture radar and the two radar systems we utilized have effectively unlocked this vault. Within this vault lies what I consider the truth, the undeniable reality of the facts. Consequently, synthetic aperture radar unequivocally serves as our key to advancing, to revealing all that we can from this object reality, and presenting it to those who believe Egyptologists possess all the answers. Thank you.
No. Esattamente.
Allora, abbiamo finito, non c'è spazio ovviamente per le domande e chi vuole può firmare con il professor Malanga, che adesso tra un po' va fuori, i libri o l'autografo o quant'altro. Lui è a disposizione, si mette lì.
Non dico che è uguale, io ho trovato un'altra struttura di silicio dentro al corpo umano.
Ah, ok.
Abbiamo fatto un lavoro
su
cellule che si riempiono di silicio.
Wow, veramente?
Evviva, meno male.
L'avete pubblicato? Sì, sì. Io non ne uso, però vi posso scrivere perché io sono un po' semplice.
Senti, io ne do...
Grazie. Sì.
Fatemi scendere.
Siamo sentiti.